Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, July 28th, 2020 meeting of the Long Meadow School Committee. Per Governor Baker's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, the public will not be allowed to physically access the school committee meeting. School committee is using the Zoom meeting platform to conduct this meeting. LCTV is live streaming the meeting on Channel 12, and a recording of the meeting will be posted to the LCTV YouTube channel as soon as possible after the meeting. Just a reminder, all votes while participating remotely must be made by roll call vote. So, to explain why we're wearing masks, we made an attempt to have this as much in person as possible. We're using the high school auditorium, and in order to model correct behavior for our students in the upcoming school year, should they be present with each other, we are wearing masks. It's difficult to see someone when they're speaking, so I'm going to ask the speakers to take their mask off so that they can be seen by the public who are watching on Zoom. And when we're not speaking, we're going to put the mask back on the way I started the meeting. So, that being said, we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. We actually have a flag, so we can do that today.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Correspondence, Kevin. Let me unmute you, Kevin. There we go.
An email letter dated July 22nd, 2020 from Ms. Liz Bone regarding Mr. Richard Foster's proposal to the Select Board for the elimination of town meeting. An email letter dated July 23rd, 2020 from Ms. Chelsea Camerlin, Ms. Jamie LaCourciere Fonseca, and Ms. Rebecca McKittrick, Wolf Swamp Road School kindergarten teachers regarding the reopening of school.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is the minutes from our last meeting. All right, hold on a second. I am going to...
I'm still unmuted. I think I can make the motion.
Okay, Kevin, go ahead.
I move that the school committee approve the minutes for the July 21st, 2020 school committee meeting as presented.
Second.
Okay. As our teachers are going to find out, this is difficult. Give me 1 second. I want to be able to unmute the committee members. I want them to be able to unmute themselves. So I'm going to do this over again. Give me 1 second. So everybody's unmuted. Where's that ability again? You all, and there we go. Allow people to unmute themselves. I said yes. So when you're ready to speak, you can unmute yourself. So we had, who seconded that? Susie seconded.
You need me to do it again?
Any discussion about the minutes from last meeting? Seeing none, you can unmute yourself to vote. We're going to do a roll call. Jamie?
Yes.
Bradley?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Deanna?
Yes.
Susie?
Yes.
Ms. Schwanier?
Yes.
Thank you. This is throwing me off so much. All right, so can I have a consensus from the group to move our, oh no, we got school committee announcements and recognitions first. Anybody with any announcements or recognitions that they would like to mention? Jamie, you're good? Nobody? Okay, the only one I would like to make is that I saw there was a drone video from the graduation from Ms. Joyle. I thought that was really cool, so I appreciate the fact that she did that and had it sent to all of us. That was really cool. So again, the graduation was wonderful. Great job by the high school staff on that. So next is business with guests, but I would like to move, if we do our administrative reports first, because the business with guests is the reason why we're all here. So Marty, is there a superintendent report aside from what you're presenting tonight? My report as chair is basically everyone to be aware of the changing nature of this situation. You're going to hear a lot of that in the presentation tonight, and we all really need to pay attention to this because in the past week, we got 7 different issues of guidance from DESE. In the next week, we're going to get more. So although we're presenting plans tonight, please be prepared as families of these students that it's going to change. Staff, be aware, this is the situation as it is, not how it'll be in a month. So be aware that this is an ever-changing situation and we are all doing our best to deal with what it is at this time. Student report. Armin, do you have a report?
No, I have no report to give tonight.
Any reports for LPVC, energy and sustainability, or open space? Yep. Raman, do you have one for LPVC?
No, we're meeting next month.
Kevin.
I can give a quick report from energy and sustainability. 3 things. One, they wanted to remind folks, especially when they're in the car lines, not to idle their car. Hopefully that hasn't been an issue lately, but for the future, something to think about. They also wanted, especially in the high school, folks to think about environmental studies requirements to help educate the students and the community about environmental issues. And the third one is that they're starting the process of installing electric car chargers around town. And the first wave will not include chargers at the schools, but we're working hard to try to convince folks in town to get electric chargers at the schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Jamie, did you have one or no? No, okay. So then we are on to our main purpose for being here, the business with guests. The superintendent will present reopening plans.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with everyone in person here in the auditorium, in socially distanced ways, observing the mask protocols that are in place statewide. And as we begin, I want to recognize the folks that are with us spaced out here in the auditorium. We have representatives from the entire administrative team. Chief John Dearborn is the emergency manager for the town of Long Meadow, and the fire chief is with us. Facilities director Nick Gigantis is here as well, and health agent Beverly Hirschhorn is joining us remotely via Zoom. So I want to thank those 3, especially as partners in the work that we've done, but really primarily acknowledge the work that the administrative team has done over the last 5 months, which is really beyond description in terms of the amount of time they put in, their collaborative efforts, the professionalism with which they've approached this task, the caring manner, their receptivity to feedback has been outstanding. And this has been a day and night effort. It has required more of an administrative team than I've ever seen in my entire career. And that says a lot. And I'd like to publicly thank them for putting in countless hours into this task and bringing us to this point this evening where we're pleased to report to the school committee and provide a status report and a recommendation for reopening. So I will begin by sharing my screen.
For 1 second.
Sure.
Because in my haste to move around the business with guests with administrative reports, I skipped visitor comments. And we do have a lot of people on Zoom.
Yep.
So I want to reiterate again, some of you came in late. We're attempting to get, I got to remove this again. We're attempting to get this done in person so people can come and talk to us. We want to hear from the community. We want to hear from families, students, and we're attempting to get an in-person meeting as much as possible. Outdoors, the problem of weather and light is a problem. And in here in the auditorium, We got information that we're still limited to 25 participants, and our guests this evening get us up close to 25. So, and to be fair to all of the visitors who might be here, we have, I don't know how many are on at this point. We have too many to come into the auditorium and fit the governor's current guidelines. So before Superintendent O'Shea gives his presentation, is there anybody on our Zoom meeting who wants to give us a comment for this evening? We haven't had one in the past, but I want to offer it every time because that is the goal and that is the point of having a public meeting. So if there's anybody who is on this meeting who wants to give a visitor comment, which we limited to 3 minutes, unmute yourself, make yourself known so that I can call on you and give you the opportunity to speak. Do a little teacher wait time. Make sure. Anybody unmute themselves? I'm flipping through our guests and I don't see anyone unmuting themselves. All right, so the superintendent is going to give us his presentation. We are going to attempt for next week, if we can, to get more people actually in here in person, whether it's in the auditorium or some other venue that allows us to do an in-person meeting, because I would really rather do that. Unfortunately, at the moment, this is what we are stuck with. So the committee, except for one, are present right here so we can look each other in the eye. We have the admin team, as Marty just pointed out, here in front of us so we can talk to them as well. At the moment, unfortunately, this is the best we can do, but we are going to try to get the public available to our meeting as soon as possible. So, Marty, back to you. Let me mute myself.
Thank you. And if anyone has any difficulty hearing me, please let me know. So I normally like to run through presentations with breaks in between for questions. And my sense is that this one might work better if we have the opportunity to go through the deck, because there are so many issues that are sort of tangled together. And as we talk about learning, there are facilities issues. And as we talk about facilities issues, there's obviously health and safety issues. So I'll do my best to be efficient. But there is, I think, a considerable amount of information here for the committee to review. And beyond the slide deck here, I'd encourage members of the community to take a look at the resources that are posted to the website. We've put up all the most recent DESE guidance, and as Chairman Kelly pointed out, we have received a considerable amount of guidance in the last less than 7 days. And again, that's been part of the countless hours that the admin team has put in to bring us to this point this evening. So I'll go full screen, and if there are any difficulties with the display or the audio, please let me know. So the timeline is before you. We have tonight's reopening presentation. Between now and next week, there is an opportunity for public comment. There's an opportunity for additional stakeholder engagement, any clarifications that we need to make. If the committee has requests for revisions or additional information, we'll have the week to do that as well. And then on August 4th, as Chairman Kelly pointed out, that would be the opportunity for the committee to consider the plan, get additional information, and then if it's in a position to do so, to make a final vote. And I should qualify when I say a vote. I think, as you'll hear many times in tonight's presentation, that this is a incredibly fluid situation, and we have to understand that it's contingent on many, many factors, and the decision that is made on August 4th may make sense for August 4th, but it may or may not make sense 2 weeks after that or 3 weeks after that. And so we have to be prepared to be flexible and to be nimble and to move between the models that we'll describe. Ultimately, we're responsible for submitting a comprehensive plan to the Department of Education on August 10th. I think this slide speaks for itself, but it's an attempt to capture the informed and inclusive planning that we have been engaged in. and it has involved sorting through, sifting through an enormous amount of information, whether it be federal, and certainly many, many meetings in between, opportunities to learn about reopening plans via webinars, opportunities to meet with town officials, and certainly opportunities to talk to the school committee over the last couple of months. Any community members that are interested, the next broadcast that I will provide is on Thursday evening, July 30th at 7 p.m. It's a live broadcast, but there'll be opportunity for live question and answers. And we will record that session and post it as we have in the past. So I think the first bullet here really is among the most important bullets in tonight's presentation. And what we have been charged with professionally, what we have been asked to do by the committee, what the Reopening Advisory Task Force has been asked to do, is to consider how we could safely return as many students as possible into in-person settings to maximize learning, but to do it in a way that prioritizes health and safety. And so that has been our task, and tonight is our best, most informed effort to offer to the community a strategy for reopening Long Meadow Public Schools. There is considerable CDC guidance that we have been sifting through as well, and community members are encouraged to review that information. A July 23rd memo has been posted to our district website, and it encourages school officials to make decisions based on local community transmission metrics. So that has been sort of at the top of the list in terms of what has informed and directed our planning. As we should, I want to place health and safety at the top of the list here for your consideration. On July 17th, the Department of Education released a comprehensive 19-page document that advises schools on how to respond to COVID-19 scenarios. These would be situations if there is a symptomatic student or a confirmed case in school, on a bus, at home. There's a variety of scenarios that are clearly depicted in that document, and our response is clearly advised through that document. I had the opportunity last week, along with Vice Chair Brownman Monahan, to visit the Board of Health. Beverly Hirschhorn, our health agent, who is on the call on this meeting tonight, and can provide you with some extra information or clarification. She seemed to be confident that the DESE guidance is appropriate and it really reflects existing practice. The Board of Health has always been a great partners with Long Meadow Public Schools in terms of helping us respond to communicable disease and infectious situations. The main sort of guiding principle is to evaluate, separate, clean, and disinfect, and require quarantine orders and testing of individuals before they're allowed back in the school community. And throughout that process, what I'm very confident in is that the Board of Health would be directly involved with the schools and would direct the contact tracing that would need to happen, and advise us on the communication that we need to have with the community. So that is certainly something that probably deserves more discussion, and it's really informed the development of this plan. I think there's a number of core health and safety strategies that are worthy of our attention. The primary emphasis here is that there is no single solution, there's no single strategy to ensuring the health and safety of staff and students. There's a whole suite of tools that we need to access. The importance of communication, education, and reinforcing practices has been made very, very clear by the CDC. We're going to talk tonight about cohorting and how to use cohorting and scheduling to limit student contact and reduce exposure. And I'm going to jump ahead a slide and then come back. This is excerpted from CDC guidance. It is a definition for you of cohorting. I know
many members of the committee are familiar with this practice, but it is a way to reduce contact between and among staff and students. It's a way to stabilize the schedule. It's a way to facilitate more efficient contact tracing. So we'll talk a little bit tonight about cohorting and how that might look at each of our schools. So to go back to the core health and safety strategies, masks and PPE, family and staff certifications. If I could, again, I'll jump ahead to a slide here. I want to emphasize that this was something that came loudly and clearly from the Reopening Advisory Task Force. Just yesterday, we had a lengthy discussion about not only the certifications that staff should provide before they start the school day or their work shift, that to what extent could we get certification from families that the children that attend our schools are symptom-free and that they don't have any signs or haven't had any potential contact with the COVID-19 virus. So we discussed this with our school attorney as recently as this morning. Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Sue Bertrand. And we believe we can put together a plan to ensure that families understand the importance of sending children to school who are at all times healthy. The other concern that we have heard from staff and that we talked about at the Reopening Advisory Task Force relates to privacy. And the more we rely on synchronous video, the more opportunity there could be for privacy issues. And we would want families to understand that if a teacher were to use some synchronous video and were zooming into a student at home, that the families understand that that really is essentially a private classroom that that even parents would need to strictly abide around confidentiality requirements. So that's something that just came yesterday from the Reopening Advisory Task Force. We had a really rich discussion on that, and we think we can put some plans in place to certify in these areas. So to go back to some of the core strategies, masking. You'll see tonight that the school committee and our attendees here in the auditorium are wearing masks. I suppose it's permissible for me to take off my mask while I speak. I apologize if I was muffled, but this will be a requirement in our reopening strategy that we will shortly get into in more detail. I think the acquisition of PPE and sanitizing supplies, I can't stress it enough that in our opinion that we cannot approach any in-person reopening unless we have acquired and have adequate supplies of PPE and sanitization equipment and supplies. I thank Tom Mazza, our Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, for his aggressive pursuit of these supplies, along with Nick Gigantis, our Facilities Director. Signage, I remember early on, back in, must have been March or April, I attended virtually a webinar that talked about the importance of having schools speak to the members of the learning community through signage, and to remind everyone of spacing requirements and to remind everyone of the hygiene protocols that we need. So a quick word on some of the facility preparations that we have put in place. I think one of the important considerations for our staff that we've gathered from the countless emails we've received and the feedback that we've gotten, and also judging from the CDC guidance and DESI guidance, is the attention that ventilation systems need to have, be given in preparation for any reopening. And again, the facilities department here in town has really aggressively taken a look at our HVAC systems, along with an outside consultant, to identify improvements and upgrades and enhancements, and they are listed on the slide there for your consideration. Hand sanitization stations and supplies will be critical, and just regular attention to the preventative maintenance that the HVAC systems in particular will require. We have spent a considerable amount of time tending to the health suites in our district. One of the DESE requirements is that schools have a medical waiting room. In effect, it's an isolation room that is an area where symptomatic students can be isolated as we kick into gear the COVID-19 response protocols. And then finally, enhanced facility disinfection. And if the committee has any questions on any of these items, we certainly can engage Nick or Tom. So moving on, excuse me. Some of the resources and reference documents that we've relied on and are posted to our website. I'd like to note the first bullet there, the compilation of reopening considerations sent to the task force. Task force has received, I think, probably close to 100 emails from interested community members and staff. And a credit to the hardworking members of the task force who have taken all of those emails and for ease of use by our administrative team, sort of catalog them and categorize them and put them into a working document that we need to polish up a little bit, but we'll put that in the hands of the committee so that the committee has some idea of what the community concerns were that we've heard and staff concerns. Two members of your school committee, Nicole Schrenier and Gianna Allentuck, were part of that, remain part of that task force. So you'll see that, as Chairman Kelly pointed out, much of the guidance that we have received has only recently been placed in our hands, and we are expecting more. A credit to this committee for having the foresight to dedicate making a budgetary commitment to the resources and supplies that we need to ensure any type of safe opening. You'll see, and really this is more for the community's consideration, but you'll see the really substantial effort that we have made to make sure that we are in a go position based on the return plan that we will talk about shortly. And then grant funds that we ESSER funds, elementary and secondary education funds, relief funds that are in hand. We've applied for a remote learning technology grant. Thank you, Nick George, our technology director. Then also we will be applying for coronavirus relief funds. So there is some federal and state funds that we are able to access to put us in a better position to open. So to get to, I suppose, the heart of tonight's presentation, the reopening plan that we as an administrative team are recommending to the school committee. Again, I would highlight the DESE requirement that districts prioritize safely returning as many students as possible to in-person school settings. And obviously that is with the understanding that we are meeting all health and safety requirements, both federal, state, and even local. So that was our task as an administrative team. I felt that we owed the students of Long Meadow, we owed it to the community, we owed it to the staff to roll up our sleeves and work hard on a reopening plan. And so we're pleased to present it this evening. I think everyone's aware at this point that the Department of Education has asked us to consider a continuum of reopening models, and to the far left is a return without restrictions that certainly is off the table at this point. The initial DESE guidance that came out, I think folks are aware, came out on June 25th. It signaled to us that we needed to prioritize an in-person opening. DESE had established a 3-foot social distancing standard for school districts. DESE had essentially said that a 3-foot social distance standard was permissible, a 6-foot standard was preferred, but districts could consider a 3-foot standard. And so right after that guidance came out on June 25th, the administrative team dutifully started to do the pressure testing, started to look at our spaces, and started to consider if we could safely get students in with that 3-foot standard in mind. And then after that, took a look at what it would mean, what it would look like to get all students in using a 6-foot social distance standard. And it became apparent to us quickly that though there are obviously, goes without saying, considerable advantages to having all students in person for face-to-face instruction, we realized very quickly that the obstacles were even more than we could overcome. And the sort of easiest way that I think about this is that the more staff, the more students that are in a school building, the more densely populated that building is, and the more problematic that becomes when we talk about lunch, arrival, dismissal, and busing, and the many, many other situations where students are moving throughout a building. I've heard some say, well, if it's permissible for some students to participate in some outdoor athletic pursuits safely, why can't we have students in school? I think the answer is that I'm talking about bringing hundreds of students under one roof, and the challenge of scheduling them, feeding them lunch, bringing them in, and returning them home was more than we had space for. The more staff, the more students in a building, the more contact that would likely occur. We were also concerned that the 3-foot standard was not consistent with what we were hearing from the CDC. And then finally, the 3-foot standard really would sort of disappear at lunchtime, and we would have needed to ensure that students were 6 feet apart at lunch. Then we sort of transitioned to the 6-foot standard, and though that alleviated the density within a classroom, it didn't necessarily alleviate the density that we would experience in the building as a whole, and that to accommodate all students at 6 feet apart, we would essentially need, with some exceptions, nearly double the amount of classroom space. And so there's so much detail that is underneath the slide that you're looking at, because the administrators took out their space calculators, they did the pressure testing, they had diagrams, they put tape on the ground, they moved desks just to understand what the classroom environment would look like with that 3-foot or 6-foot standard. And these are creative, hardworking administrators who are problem solvers by nature, but we felt that we could not safely bring back all students at that 6-foot standard even. And so tonight, we would say that bringing all students back at a 3-foot or 6-foot social distancing standard is not recommended. We could not confidently say that we would be able to bring back students safely and that we would be able to observe all the health and safety protocols. This is a visual that gives you some sense of what a 6-foot physically distant classroom would look like. At 3 feet, it was especially problematic, given that you would need to completely take all the extra furniture out of the room. So at 6 feet, we have some opportunities, but even there, our classrooms will, if we were to open in person in any way, our classrooms would look very different. And that's something that we want to be clear with the community about as we move forward. As I noted earlier, we've done, I think it's over 10 surveys of staff in the community combined. When the DESE guidance came out in late June, we asked the staff and the community about their willingness or their understanding, their agreement with the DESE guidance that emphasized that 3-foot standard. And you'll see that back on June 25th, I think we were all a little bit more optimistic about the country's response to the coronavirus. But even back then, you'll see that there was some strong concern about the initial fall reopening guidance that DESE had provided. And I'll come back later on in the presentation to some of the feedback that we've received from parents and caregivers. So again, to bring us back to the DESE guidance, DESE and this was even confirmed by the task force and by the school committee, that we wanted to commit to trying to identify students to attend school in person full time, again, so long as we're able to effectively meet health and safety requirements. And so that is where our work began after that July 24th guidance. And we've begun to take a look at how we could bring back, are the groups of students that we could identify to bring back in person on a full-time basis, with a special priority given to students with disabilities, preschool age students, and students with significant or complex needs. And so those are the groups that we began to consider as we looked to see who we could prioritize for receiving full in-person instruction in the coming year. So tonight, we're proposing a two-phase reopening strategy. The first phase is the phase that we are in the middle of right now. And this is a phase that, for all intents and purposes, really began back in the spring when we first started to consider what reopening would look like this fall. And so we've been engaged in everything that we mentioned earlier, the surveys, the broadcast, the information distribution, the use of the reopening email, considerable collaboration with town officials. The task force has been great. We've been in regular discussion with our partners from the LEA. We have been developing health and safety protocols, getting supplies, training, staff development. But I'd say that the last two bullets here on this slide are really especially worthy of your attention right now. And that we know that we need to continue to develop plans and reach a common understanding with staff on the teaching and learning expectations that we'll have and the schedules and routines for the first day. And that really should say for the first day and beyond. So that work continues. So though we have a reopening strategy to recommend to you tonight, we know that there is still work in front of us in terms of clearly laying out our expectations, making sure that we all have a common understanding of those expectations, and then communicating them clearly to the community. The last bullet is also worthy of the committee's strict attention as well. Just yesterday, this just goes to show you how incredibly fluid and changing this situation is. Just yesterday, we learned that the state had reached a statewide memorandum of understanding with educator associations, and it gives districts the opportunity to incorporate 10 days of preparation time for staff to start the year. To the extent that we access those 10 days, we would be opening for instruction as late as September 15th. So we're still working with our understandings of that memorandum. We need to discuss that with staff. Frankly, need to discuss it as an administrative team, as this MOU came out only yesterday. And it hit the papers today and received a few questions from interested community members. So the next slide brings us to what I would call phase two. And as we begin to talk about the plan for reopening, I want to qualify everything that I'm about to say by saying that as we enter this phase, it is contingent on making sure that the health metrics are in our favor. We will continue to be regularly in contact with the Board of Health, with our emergency manager, John Dearborn. that reopening is dependent on staffing capacity. We recognize that we will need to support staff who have some limitations upon in terms of their return to teaching or to work in our schools. There are a number of qualifying reasons that staff may access in terms of extended family medical leave or extended sick leave, that we still are understanding what our staffing levels will be like this fall. I want to assure you, everyone, that the reopening strategy that we are about to talk about in more detail, that it requires strict maintenance of the 6-foot distancing standard. So once again, we've rejected the DESI standard of 3 feet, and we are committing to a reopening strategy that maintains a 6-foot distance standard in all situations. Our reopening strategy is also contingent on having an adequate supply of PPE and sanitization supplies. It is contingent on us developing and enforcing and maintaining firm and consistent health and safety protocols. And it is contingent on the readiness of our facilities. All of these bullets right now are working in our favor. We feel that right now, July 28th, that the local metrics are working in our favor. We are working to understand how to support staff who might access the extended family medical leave. But the other aspects of this, we're confident that right now we can commit to the standards that we've identified as we enter this second phase. And again, as we enter the second phase, making sure that we are able to reach a common understanding with staff on teaching and learning expectations and schedules and routines. So to get into more specific details, tonight we're recommending that, consistent with DESI guidelines around identifying opportunities to educate students in person, that we would prioritize bringing back for full in-person learning students with disabilities, with significant needs, with high needs, with very intensive needs, requiring intensive services. And we would also prioritize offering full in-person learning to our early learners, specifically students, our preschoolers and students in kindergarten and 1st and 2nd grade. So to get into the logistics and scheduling, this would mean that we would be in a hybrid arrangement for students in grades 3 through 12. So students in grades 3 through 12 would be assigned to either cohort A or cohort B. Cohort A students would attend school in person on Monday and Tuesday. Cohort B students would attend school on Thursday and Friday. What's not noted here and should be noted on the slide deck is that the cohorts would be divided alphabetically. It's our commitment not to divide families. We understand that there may be students with different last names living under the same roof, so we would keep families intact and not split families into students in the same house into different cohorts. So this is for students in grades 3 through 12. Wednesday, you'll note, is a special day. This would be a day where it would be a day largely set aside for cleaning and disinfection. It would be an opportunity for us to provide some needed collaboration and planning time to staff. Specifically for students, this would be a day of learning. This would not be I'm cautious about calling it a half day because it's a full day of learning for students. K2 students would attend in person for a half a day and then learn remotely. Pre-K and students, the students that we noted who require intensive services, would attend in person for the full day, but it would be a remote learning day for all students in grades 3 through 12. During the first half of that day, our expectation would be that there would be some synchronous engagement between staff and students in the morning the afternoon would be reserved for the collaboration and planning time. So this slide really is sort of at the heart of the framework of our hybrid opening plan. But what I would suggest to you is that our interest is in creating a framework that can easily transition from a hybrid arrangement to a full remote arrangement if it were needed. So I want to talk just briefly about some of the key tenets, the key ideas that are built into this plan that we're presenting to you tonight, that though we are prepared to educate students under all three models, that our intent is to have a plan that can shift seamlessly between a hybrid arrangement and a full in-person arrangement, should it be needed. So this graphic is an attempt to sort of capture that and demonstrate how we will try to move seamlessly between the two scheduling models. I think there's two ways that we can ensure that this will happen. One is that we will ensure that students experience a consistent required schedule, and that the schedule that they follow would be comparable in both models. So the schedule that students follow in a hybrid arrangement would mirror the schedule that they would follow if we happen to be all remote. I want to emphasize that the text box you're seeing on the left here is really reflective of the feedback that we've received from staff and from parents and caregivers, meaning that I think all of us understand that the arrangement that we had in the spring, though we learned a lot and though people worked incredibly hard and pivoted in short manner, that we know that that model is not one that should be sustained or continued this fall. And we know that we would like to have schedules for staff and students that are consistent and predictable and required. And the other way that we can ensure that there's sort of this more seamless transition, should a transition is needed, is to make sure that we are being very attentive to learning standards. You'll recall in the spring, the emphasis initially, at least when we went remote, was on enrichment and extension and review. And again, I think there is a general consensus in this community and across the state that there needs to be, if we do find ourselves in any type of remote arrangement, hybrid or fully remote, that there needs to be strong attention to the learning standards and that students have opportunities to progress through the curriculum. So that's our commitment, that we want to make sure that there is that we can transition easily between the two models. I think sometimes the simplest way that I think about this is that if a student is, if we are in a hybrid arrangement and a student has math class at 9 o'clock and he happens to be in person, his peer at home or her peer at home will have math at 9 o'clock as well. So a consistent, predictable schedule. The schedule that students follow, that the remote cohort follows, will mirror the schedule that the students that are in person is following. So what does that look like more specifically? Let me come back to this. This is a potential model that we could follow at the elementary level, and you'll see that on the left is cohort A, and you'll see on the right cohort B. So this is 50% of the students who happen to be in cohort A in Mr. Smith's class. He has 10, 15 students in that cohort in front of him. Meanwhile, the other half of his class, the cohort B, is at home following a similar schedule, and that there's opportunities for regular, consistent engagement throughout that academic day for students who are both in the in-school cohort and for students who are in the remote cohort. So that's a potential model. would be followed at the elementary level. At the middle level, similarly, we've created a schedule that would be mirrored between the remote students and the hybrid students. So if on Monday and Tuesday, you'll see the rotation, A, B, C, D, and E block. The Tuesday schedule picks up where the Monday schedule left off. But meanwhile, the students who are at home are following the same schedule, the other half of a particular cohort. Cohort A is in school, cohort B is home, following a comparable schedule. You'll note that one of the strategies that both the middle school and the high school have employed here is to run fewer blocks per day, longer in length. The idea is to have fewer passing times, fewer opportunities for cohorts to mix. And when you do that, you're stabilizing the schedule and you're reducing contact. If there were a COVID-19 scenario, you would have limited the pool of students who might have been exposed. So that's the middle school schedule. And similarly, at the high school, you'll see the potential schedule. High school runs 8 blocks. For reasons that Mr. Dunkerley, who is here with us today, can explain, there's a rotation in the schedule. But potentially on Monday, students could attend, who are in person, could attend A block and B block. Meanwhile, students who are at home, the other half of the cohort, are essentially attending A block and B block at the same time. Break for lunch, E and F block, again, longer blocks to reduce the rotations, to stabilize the cohort, to stabilize the schedule, and create a safer arrangement all around. And so the cohorts would flip. Cohort A would be in person on Monday and Tuesday. Cohort B would be in person on Thursday and Friday. The other important cohorting strategy that the elementary potentially could follow is to create a team assigned to each classroom. So in the core here, in the middle, is the classroom teacher, who remains connected to both the students who are in person and the students who are remote, both cohorts. But working together collaboratively is a team of teachers who can support students who are working remotely. One of the important considerations here is that the elementary principals, and again, in an effort to reduce the amount of exposure across the elementary schools, a single related arts teacher would be assigned to a single grade level for an extended period of time. So in this case, for example, you might have an art teacher who's assigned, let's say, to grade 2. And rather than every student getting every related art at the elementary level, students would receive art class in grade 2, in the example that I'm providing, for several weeks, and then rotate through another related art. We felt like it was a way to make this schedule more manageable for staff, make it more manageable for kids, and make it easier to understand for parents, so that, to recall, in the spring, one of the challenges for our elementary students especially was juggling the connections that they needed to make with all of their teachers, which for an elementary student was their core classroom teacher plus all of their related arts teachers. Also available to support our remote learners would be specialists, perhaps homebound teachers, perhaps licensed academic tutors, and if there's a special educator tied to the cohort of students in that class, then that special educator or perhaps a paraprofessional would be involved in supporting that model. So again, it's a way to create a small, more isolated cohort of students that can, and teachers that can work together as a team to support students who are in school or perhaps out of school. So those are some of the key cohorting and scheduling strategies that we are recommending we put in place. And again, emphasizing that the schedules that we've put forward today, though they're potential schedules, proposed schedules, they reflect our commitment to providing staff and students with a consistent, predictable, required experience. One of the key components of the DESE guidance, the fourth bullet there, relates to access and interaction. And I won't read this to you, it speaks for itself, but it articulates the expectation that students have regular, consistent opportunities to access live synchronous instruction and student-to-student interaction and be engaged in collaborative projects. So the expectation there is very specific, and we think that makes sense for us here in Long Meadow. So with that, we want to think about, with our staff, think about how we can encourage that interaction between the teachers who are working with students who are both in person and students who are at home. Some of the other key tenets that I'd like to note relate to attendance. For any students who happen to be watching, Armin is over my shoulder right now. There'll be regular daily attendance requirements, and attendance will be taken, and it will be required and reported. So again, a very different expectation, a very different approach than we had in the spring. Some of the other feedback that we got from the Reopening Advisory Task Force related to the social emotional needs of staff and students. We recognize that this will be a significant adjustment for staff and students when they come back. I think we experienced it here in the high school auditorium tonight. Understand, kind of recognizing that as we juggle the masks and the technology and the distancing requirements, that there'll be a new normal that will need to be developed. And we're very committed to making sure that we are doing everything we can to meet students' social emotional needs, because we recognize that this will be a very different and difficult adjustment for kids. So there's a number of opportunities and strategies that we can put in place to ensure that we are meeting students' SEL needs. Much of this looks familiar and should look familiar. I was very pleased that our school adjustment counselors this summer developed an online professional development course for our educators, basically around how we can support students as they return and readjust to schooling. And then some of the regular programmatic opportunities that we have to ensure that we're cultivating those deep relationships, and that we're also communicating our work in that area to families. The last set of bullets on this slide relate to the work that our school adjustment counselors have done to get us ready for the coming school year. And there's certainly opportunities that classroom teachers will access to ensure that students have opportunities to move, to get outdoors, to take mask breaks. We know that those are part of the social emotional requirements that students will have upon their return. And we've begun to tear apart the roadmap offered by the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, and using that as a guide for our SEL work in the coming year. So the last two bullets there, again, some of the key tenets that we want to build into the arrangement that we are proposing tonight. We want to ensure that students who are learning remotely have that synchronous access to in-person learning. And I want to be clear that when we talk about synchronous access, it doesn't only involve the use of video-based technology. I think that we can engage students in real time through a variety of strategies. We can employ available personnel, we can employ instructional technology, and we can employ instructional techniques that I know our staff have been busy learning this summer in many respects on their own, but also through some district provided PD. So having that, working to have some clear expectations and understandings on how students who are learning at home can reasonably access the learning that is happening in the classroom. And we have some work to do still in this area. It has been ongoing, but it is a conversation that we want to continue to engage in and think about and troubleshoot on to make sure that we have ways for students to access in-person learning if they happen to be in the remote cohort. We would like to make a strong commitment to having those synchronous lessons be used every instructional block. And our principals here can explain how they've set up schedules and routines to make that happen. The idea of engagement throughout that instructional block, and that's not to say that there won't be times, there certainly will be times that students will be working independently, but it would be guided work. There would be work that would need to be done during a particular instructional block. We've talked a lot about exit tickets. We've talked about demonstrations of learning. We've talked about formative assessments and how can we make sure that kids are regularly engaged in the instructional block, whether they are in person or at home. One of the great things I think that will happen this spring that we didn't have access to last spring was access to buildings, instructional equipment, supplies, and materials. You recall last spring, we were shut down. It was difficult for us to give staff access to their classrooms. They were anxious to get into their rooms, to get supplies, to get instructional equipment, to grab some technology. But that was very difficult in some cases because of the statewide orders. I think this fall we'll have more opportunities for teachers to actually obviously be in the buildings, accessing equipment, accessing supplies. I think we'll have chances to put hard copy learning materials in children's hands. That was, again, part of the feedback that we received through the Reopening Advisory Task Force, that we do not want to create a situation where students have a laptop open in front of them all day. That's not what this will be about. We understand that we should be monitoring screen time. Zoom fatigue is a very real thing. I think we've all experienced it. We want to engage kids in authentic ways. So we mentioned following the state framework. I want to be loud and clear around our commitment to having consistent platforms. We heard from staff, we heard from students that there was too many logins, too many emails, too many places to go, too many platforms, and we want to standardize that. We've identified Seesaw as the learning management system for pre-K and K, and we've identified Google Classroom as the required learning platform for staff and students in grades 1 through 12. Chromebook deployment. Nick George is our technology director. We're working to acquire Chromebooks for all students. We are working to acquire those Chromebooks with districts across the country. We put our order in earlier than anybody, I would say. So Chromebook deployment is an important part of the strategy that we have for reopening, a one-to-one deployment. Even if we were back in person for all students, we think that that is an arrangement that makes sense for a variety of reasons. Assessment and feedback. We heard from staff, students, families, parents, caregivers that the pass-fail arrangements, though they made sense at the time, we cannot build our plans on pass-fail arrangements. That this will be more have a more traditional feel to it in terms of the assessment and feedback that teachers regularly provide to students. And then finally, I want to emphasize, and Jean Fontaine is our People Services Director. She can answer any specific questions you might have. We'll have to ensure that we are providing the instructional services that are required by students with disabilities. Students who need specialized instruction, we will need to make our best effort to provide that instruction. So what that means is that where in the spring it was permissible to sort of rely on providing students with disabilities key resources and supports, we need to really make sure we're emphasizing providing direct specialized instruction and related services. So that has been clear in the guidance, the special education guidance that we have received from both state agencies and federal agencies. So in terms of the provision of services to students with disabilities, again, consistent with the DESE guidance in this area, we are recommending that we offer in-person learning to all pre-K special education students and students with intensive, significant, and complex needs. Parents can expect that we must provide written notification to them on how IEP services will be provided. You can also expect that students with disabilities, like all students, that they will benefit from a regular and consistent schedule. That's a schedule of classes, interventions, services, and therapies as required by students' IEPs. So again, the structure and the predictability that we're bringing to our reopening will benefit all students, but it will be a particular benefit to students with disabilities. One of the things that, another area that we need some additional work in is the full remote offering. So if the district were in a hybrid or in an all-person model, there might still be families that who do not want their children to participate in the district's program. And so we have to be mindful of that. We have to be respectful of that. I'll come back to this slide in a minute, but this gives you some idea of the perspective of parents. Back in June, we had asked parents that if we came back to reopen to all students, would you be comfortable returning your children, sending your child in? At that time, a little bit under 10% of families said that they would not be comfortable. Our more recent survey asked a similar question: if all students, and this is for all students, if all students returned on a daily basis, would you be prepared to send your child in? You can see that the number grew. I think the number grew because of some of the trends that the coronavirus was following nationally. And so parents have expressed considerable hesitation about returning their children to school if we were all in person. That's if all students were here all the time. We also asked parents if they would participate in school, if they would send their child in if we were on a hybrid schedule. I recognize that when parents responded to this, that we didn't have a very specific plan. So we'll have to go back out and ask this question yet again. But you'll see here that we have still a percentage of parents that and caregivers that have told us that they would not be prepared to send their children in, and that they would opt to participate in a remote learning only plan. So I suppose to our frustration, it was only on July 24th that DESE provided us with some guidance and some options on how to fulfill our obligation to students who might be fully remote. And so right now, we're in the middle of sort of untangling that guidance, exploring the 5 options, and figuring out what is manageable and how to best serve those students who might be fully remote. To be clear, if families did opt for their child or children to be fully remote, they would continue in enrollment in Long Meadow Public Schools. Attendance would be mandatory, and we would provide the technology access that all kids need. I would caution parents that if a child needed to transition from a all full remote plan to more of the hybrid or in-person learning plan that we have in place, that parents can expect that there would have to be a waiting period. We wouldn't be able to turn it around within a day or 2 days or even 3 days probably. There'd be a period of time where we would need to assess what progress the child has made in that full remote program, understand where they are, and then understand how to transition them back into any in-person model that we might be running. So we looked at the data here. So that really gets into, that concludes the portion of the presentation that describes some of the teaching and learning frameworks that we will have in place, or that we're recommending we have in place for the fall. There's some key considerations relating to transportation. I won't read it to you. It's there. But Tom Mazza, as our Facilities and Operations Assistant Superintendent, has been talking to the LPVEC, the collaborative that provides our busing services, and they feel that they are in a go position. One of the reasons that we feel in Long Meadow that we can open for more students than perhaps other districts do is because we don't have the transportation pressures that other communities have. So there are communities that run on a daily basis dozens and dozens of buses. That is not the case here. We live in a sort of more compact community, and we only run 4 buses on a regular basis, I believe. And so we've got some flexibility in terms of the transportation planning that we have in place. There are districts that are sort of paralyzed by the social distancing requirements that you have to observe even in busing situations. I'll skip over the diagram. There's been very specific guidance on how to space children out on a school bus, and we will adhere to that. Food service. I'm pleased to report that as of now, we are projecting that under the model in front of you today, that we would be able to provide lunch service in the cafeteria in all schools. We'll achieve that in different ways. One of the ways we'll achieve it is by using plexiglass dividers between students at lunch tables. And there's a visual that sort of depicts how that might look. The typical capacity of a lunch table will be reduced under this arrangement, but it will allow students some sort of face-to-face contact. Where possible, we would still explore opportunities for outdoor seating. We've over the last couple of years, we've made some investments in outdoor seating. Kids seem to enjoy it, and we'd like to continue to explore that. It might be, families should know this, it might be that our food service partners, Fresh Picks, that they will need to supply, they kind of modify the offerings. Some of the options that students had, relating to, say, salad bars, we may not be in a position to provide those types of offerings for, I suppose, obvious reasons. We will maintain the 6 foot or more separation requirement. Children will be unmasked in the lunchroom. There will be custodial cleaning in between lunches. And we will ask our food service provider to provide us with very clear food preparation and service protocols. And then one of the things that we're exploring is how can we put even more emphasis on non-contact prepayment. So those are some of the things happening with food service. I want to go back to just hit on some miscellaneous things very quick, and then we'll wrap it up and open it up for your questions. These are some of the questions that the Reopening Advisory Task Force has heard, and I've kind of bucketed them into some of the themes that they've identified. Mask policies. We will be clear and tight in our expectations. We will understand and recognize that students need mask breaks. And we understand that we will need to be well supplied with masks. So those supplies are already in hand. They are an obstacle to Mr. Mazza's office. He may have set it up that way, I'm not sure, but you'll have to climb over some boxes to get into his office right now. So the masks are an important strategy for us. The additional PPE as needed, as required, as recommended, gloves, shields, gowns for staff that will be in close proximity to students, particularly those that we mentioned earlier will be served by special educators and for students who are with intensive needs. Hand hygiene is a critical mitigation strategy. We will emphasize hand sanitization upon arrival, before eating, and at dismissal. And then in terms of sanitization, it does appear that the guidance would permit children to be involved in wiping their desk. We will do that in age-appropriate ways. We'll do it in safe ways. But we think that that is a mitigation strategy that is permissible. We definitely would want to assure parents that children would not be present during any of the disinfection work that our custodians would do after hours. Educator and staff support. We received a considerable amount of feedback in this area. And I was really pleased that under the leadership of Sue Bertrand, we were able to put together a robust summer professional development program. Should also note that the 10 days relief that DESE has provided through the MOU that we mentioned earlier will provide us with some additional needed time to make sure that we have all our preparations in place, to make sure that all the safety and health protocols are locked and loaded, and to be sure that teachers have adequate time to prepare for the reopening strategy that we're recommending tonight. I think it's important for the committee, the community, for all of us to be very aware of the COVID-19 related leave provisions. We had an opportunity to meet with Erica Jelinas, who is the director of HR in the town of Long Meadow. She will have a busy office this fall. And we will want to communicate very clearly to staff what those leave provisions are and what the potential exemptions might be. Health and safety protocol training for staff and students. We recognize that, when students arrive to us in the fall, that there'll be a period of time where we will need to sort of train them in remote learning, train them in health and safety protocols, train them in new routines, train them, particularly our youngest learners, train them in how to use and take off a mask. So, we're committed to that. We recognize that that will be an important part of our startup work. Self-certification, mentioned it earlier. This is a part of the something that staff will have to do when they arrive to school or start a shift every single day. They'll have to certify that they are symptom-free and that they meet the health and safety requirements that have been outlined by the Board of Health and with the work by our emergency manager. So our self-certification process mirrors the self-certification process that is in place in the entire town. We are committed to the idea that Wednesday, the second half of Wednesday, can be a time for planning and collaboration. This is a new approach to instruction for staff. We have to be supportive. We have to be understanding of that. We want to make sure that we build in regular time for them to work together in teams to support children in the reopening strategy that we've recommended. Instructional technology, we continue to take a look at both hardware and software that will support staff. Nick George is working tirelessly to identify and purchase the tools that we need to be sure that we're successful in the fall. Nursing services, we've identified separate medical waiting rooms, essentially isolation rooms in the health suite at each school. One of the things that our nurses just today recommended is a COVID communication health line, whether it be an email hotline or a phone hotline, some dedicated way that we can get information quickly from families and staff if there is a COVID-19 related concern. So you can count on that. Athletics and extracurriculars, we talked about that last week with the school committee. We know that athletics would start no earlier than September 14th. I think we all recognize that the prospect for some sports is limited. There are high-risk sports and there are low-risk sports. And when we, once we really have a firm idea of how we will reopen following the school committee's decision and based on the realities in September, we would explore options for remote, virtual, or extracurriculars. And what extracurriculars or what athletics can we do safely, either in person or if we have to in some remote way. So that's another thing that we will continue to explore in the weeks ahead. So to wrap it up, next steps, I appreciate your patience with this long presentation. There is work in front of us, considerable amount of work in front of us. Thursday evening, I'll run another broadcast, we'll record it. There will be an opportunity for direct questions and answers from the community. The reopening email is still available. We are committed to clarifying expectations, reaching common understandings with staff on what our teaching and learning expectations are and how the schedules will work. I'm certain that we will have to do some additional surveying, both of parents and caregivers and of staff. And then we'll be sure to continue to post information to the website. And all of this is in preparation for the August 4th school committee meeting. We have some time to answer any questions the committee might have. Some we can answer tonight, some we might have to take back as a team and bring you additional information on August 4th. And then finally, August 10th is when we need to submit our final plans to the Massachusetts Department of Education. So once again, our administrative team is here for the committee tonight. We have every school represented, we have town departments represented, and we are eager to hear your thoughts and questions and ideas as we move towards the reopening of Long Meadow Public Schools. So thank you. Appreciate your patience with the dozens of slides that we needed to bring to you tonight.
Thank you, Marty. That was, as you noted, long and exhaustive, and I appreciate all the work that everybody here in the room has done to get this going. So committee members, I imagine you wrote down a few questions. Anybody interested in going first? As far as like how we do this, do you want to go start in the beginning of the slides, or you just want to go like what struck you the most that you want to talk about? I don't care either way. Like what struck you the most? Jenna? You want to start by slides and just keep it going in order? All right. So that's how Gianna's brains work. Anything on the first page? We got 4 slides on our handout, but you could look on the. I don't know if Marty, you want to go back to the beginning maybe? So as we
Sure, yeah. It should be projecting now. Are you able to see the slide deck?
All right. So if you want to see it a little bit bigger than it is in our handout. Anybody have any questions in the beginning? It's kind of just the setup stuff. Page 2, I'm going by the hard copy, so now I'm on like slide 8. Give me a shout if you have a question on any of these, if we get to one. My first question comes on the second page there, the one with staff and family certification. and you just talked about it again at the end. How is that I don't understand the self-certification process of staff. Are they coming up to each principal and saying, good morning, I'm good? Or is it like, I got a text message from my dentist today that I had to click through to make sure I was okay to go?
It's a quick Google form. Staff would be expected to access are expected right now as full year staff are expected to access the form. And it's simply submitting your name and certifying that you've met a list of health and safety requirements.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they do that every morning?
Every morning.
Okay, thank you. Kevin.
I guess the one thing, Marty, that I didn't hear you talk about that I really would like to have a little discussion on, or I don't know. My biggest concern is that folks are going to travel somewhere that's a hotspot and they're going to come back and they're not going to quarantine. Did I understand correctly? There was some talk last meeting that teachers have agreed that they are not going to do that.
I don't think we don't have that agreement in place. I think staff are very aware that the quarantine restrictions. I think that one of the things that might alleviate that concern are the 10 additional days that we potentially could have to start the year. And again, that would shorten the instructional year for students from 180 days to 170 days, but it would be time for staff training and staff development, but it would also be a time where students would not be in our buildings until that period has gone by. So potentially the instructional year could be starting later. I see Beverly Hirschhorn, our health director, who's obviously more informed on the quarantine requirements than the rest of us. So is it okay if Beverly jumps in here, Mr. Kelly? Beverly, is okay?
Yeah.
Yes, that'll be fine, thank you.
Okay. Beginning August 1st, all citizens who travel outside of the New England states, New York and New Jersey, when they return, there's a mandatory 14-day quarantine unless they either can take a COVID test before they leave their place of travel with a negative result, and that test would be within 72 hours of leaving their place of travel, or they would need to quarantine when they get home until they can produce a test with a negative COVID test. So this is applicable to all citizens of Massachusetts and not just the school community.
I have a follow-up on that, but my understanding from the governor is that there's pretty much the honor system on.
No, it is not.
That's doing
not,
this.
That's
so
not
how's that being tracked by whoever who's tracking where people go and when they come back?
Okay. There's if you come in by some sort of public transportation, there'll be a forms and notifications made to people. There will be forms that need to be filled out. They're going to go to a contact tracing service and then provided as needed to the local boards of health to track that. So the details are not complete, but it is not totally a honor system, and there is a $500 fine built into those orders.
Yeah, I get that. But my question is basically, so if I drive to Virginia and back in my car, that's one of the areas that we can't go out of Massachusetts. And unless the government is tracking me through the gantries over the highway, there's proof I've gone. So it's my requirement, my responsibility to say, hey, I left the state and now I'm back. So that's the honor system part. If people aren't doing that, then we really don't have any way of knowing.
You are correct. That's one of the limitations for people coming by train, bus, and airplane. Will be provided those forms and urged to self-report.
Right.
You are correct.
Kevin, is there something from your original question that you want to follow up on that topic, or is that really what you wanted to get to?
Yeah, I would like to follow up. Marty, thanks for the clarification, right? So I think just to restate so that I understand, and again, to help the folks at home, what we're looking at doing is the first 10 days are going to be training for staff in schools without any children here. And so it's pretty clear that the staff are going to be here. They're not going to be elsewhere because they're going to be here training, getting ready for the children to arrive. And I think my key point is that, and I think I wrote down one of the phrases that you had, right? Like it was, school safety is shared responsibility. And I think my concern goes to the point that Ryan just made, which is, Labor Day is right in the middle of that time. If people decide they're going to take a road trip to Florida, they can't come back to school until they've met the requirements that Beverly just laid out. And I just think that's the critical piece that's going to keep everybody safe, right? It's going to keep parents, staff, and kids safe. And I really want to stress that whole idea of it's a shared responsibility and that we all have to take this seriously, because that's the only way we're going to keep people safe. And so I think, I don't know if we can make that part of, the certification process, but I would love us to be able to somehow make everybody certify that they have followed the state guidelines before they come into one of our schools.
So that currently is part of the self-certification that staff must provide before they start work each day. And then we would seek in a more global way a certification from families to have them ensure that they're not sending children to school who have traveled to a restricted area or who are symptomatic in any way. So I think that's really important feedback, Kevin.
And I would also thank you, Kevin. I think this is a great one to bring up. And also back to Beverly's point about the punishment for people who are found to not follow this rule is $500 a day. So hopefully that's enough of a deterrent for people to actually go get the tests or quarantine as they're required to do. So we can, make that requirement public. And like Kevin said, it's all of our responsibility to work together on this. And that kind of education maybe will convince the families to follow and staff to follow it. So great question. Both ways. So I see both Nicole and Gianna. Who wants to go first?
I'm just curious, Marty, you had just mentioned a sort of global certification from parents. Would that be a daily suggestion as well, or would that be more of a you sign it at the beginning of the school year? What's the plan, or is there one that's already fully developed for that?
Nicole, I missed, I apologize. I don't know if it's better for me to listen directly. The question was, would we require a daily certification from families?
Yes.
No, I think it would be a certification that we would seek from families to start the school year. Certainly it could be this may be a policy consideration for the school committee, but we did receive confirmation from our legal counsel that that is a strategy that we could put in place, that we could seek, probably in the same way that we ask families to have children sign off on an acceptable use agreement. We would ask families to certify that they would not be sending children to school who are symptomatic or who've traveled to a restricted area. Right now, it wouldn't involve a
a daily certification. I think the way I think about this is, we need to really work hard to educate and remind the community about the importance of all of us sharing the responsibility for creating very, very safe schools for staff and students. So I would want to commit to that, to make sure that we're providing those periodic reminders. I think in my mind that, the greatest certification a family could make, I suppose, is to send their child to school each day. But I would still want that written certification that we talked about. We could do it periodically, but at this point we were thinking that it would be a certification that families would have to provide before the school year started.
Thank you.
This question is also for Beverly and maybe Chief Dearborn. Can y'all just talk us through? So, as a public school system, we can't force people to get tested. I don't even know if we can force them to quarantine, but let's say they choose to quarantine and not get tested. How does that impact our ability to trace who might have been, exposed to somebody while they were asymptomatic and then they chose to quarantine and not get if we don't know, if they choose not to get tested and we don't know whether or not they have COVID, how does that impact our ability to trace and then do all the kind of the branching out of contacting the other people who might need to get tested?
Beverly, you're muted.
Beverly, can you unmute yourself?
Sorry, I didn't understand. I was muted. John Dearborn can certainly follow up, but I think you need to understand that boards of health operate under legal authority, and that there are laws and regulations for in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for isolation, quarantine, exclusions, etc. So isolation and quarantine actually are legal orders which we actually get out to people, and they need to be discharged from those orders to re-engage in their normal activities. And we have ways of sort of checking up on people as best as we can without totally overdoing our police powers to encourage them to comply with these orders. Every case in Massachusetts that has a laboratory finding is sent immediately electronically to a local board of health, and that system is monitored 7 days a week. So we know about every case. Any case that is in an outside community, if those communities check their cases and will inform us if there are any contacts in this community, and then we begin with that other community, we begin a follow-up of quarantine of all contacts. So it's very much a legal process. If someone is a contact and doesn't want to take a test, that's fine. They stay in quarantine for 14 days. And under current Massachusetts rules from the Mass Department of Public Health, even if you test negative and you're a contact, you still have to serve those 14 days in quarantine. So it's a very legalistic process, which the Board of Health will enforce with the assistance perhaps of some school nurses who may be able to tell us who the applicable people are and maybe help us get in touch with their families, sort of as a liaison with the school department, so that when a health official calls, there's some recognition that the school department has been involved in the process. But it's a legal process, and we have ways of enforcing it. That's so I don't know what John Dearborn would like to add to that process.
I think the lack of a test or a positive result doesn't really interfere with our ability to do contact tracing. And we've obviously been having a lot of discussion on how we'll make this happen in the school environment. So the lack of a test or a positive result, if we have a suspicion of a symptomatic person, we can still proceed with the contact tracing notifications even without the actual result. In all likelihood, because there are delays from suspicion to actually test results, if we had a suspicion, we would actually engage in the contact tracing just due to the suspicion rather than wait for a positive result. So we really, and Beverly and I spent a good amount of time on the phone today talking about we really need to be nimble with this as we move into this, be able to react very quickly. And we've been doing this since February now. We've had really good luck with our tracing in town and keeping cases consolidated. So we plan to continue that.
Gianna, I see you have a follow-up, but can I just add to that really quickly? Marty, it would be true that should somebody, I just want you to be able to say this out loud, that should a family or a student go somewhere and then come back, let's say it's not right before school, but it's in September or it's in October, and they come back and say like, we went somewhere, so I'm gonna stay home. Give me the remote learning plan. The administrators will be able to keep that student learning even though they're now at home. So can you talk about that for a second? Unmute yourself.
I suppose in the same way now that we're able to respond to students who are homebound for various reasons, we'd make that commitment going forward. And I think we would be, given the strategies and techniques and the instructional technology that our teachers will be using, I think they'll be in a position to support those students who might be quarantined because of a travel restriction. So, yeah.
Thank you. Gianna, you had another question?
Yeah, thank you, Beverly and Chief Dearborn. The testing thing was really what I was trying to figure out, if you needed to have a test in order to do all the other contact tracing. So thank you for that. And then can I just ask two more questions of them, Ryan? One is a simple, one of the task force members, Karen, had mentioned last year vaping was a problem at the high school, and we just wanted, or I guess I'm just asking if y'all had, or if there's any concern about, particles in vaping with COVID.
I'm concerned of any ways of person-to-person transmission. If people were vaping together within 6 feet of another person for more than 15 minutes, you have that probably would enhance that whole process of vaping may enhance the amount of virus spread. But I'm not sure that's whether that's going to be a very important means of transmission. It's the fact that they're together in a group setting with their masks off, sitting close to each other, that's a real problem. The vaping is only an additive issue and increases the potentiality of transmission.
Thank you, Beverly. I guess I was thinking if somebody was vaping in the bathroom and then somebody came along afterwards and walked in, are those vaping, I don't even know what they're called, fumes, or, is there the danger of particles being in those vaping fumes even though the people are not in there together?
I'm more concerned about the droplets than I am the vape.
so the droplets are not carried in the vaping, I guess, like if somebody walked in.
If they're already combined chemically with the vape, I'm concerned about loose droplets that are already combined with another substance, with another compound.
Oh,
they're available immediately to enter the nose and mouth.
Thanks for that, Beverly. And then I guess just my last question on for you two is, if a student has sensory issues and cannot wear a mask, and we know that the face shields are not equitable or as effective, if a student's family provided like like those papper things, the things that go around your head, would that student be allowed to use that PPE?
I'll take that one, Bev. So we're looking at, we actually have Captain Andy Frazier's on the meeting also. He's our COVID compliance officer. He's working under emergency management. He's a retired fire captain, health and safety officer from the department. So he's been researching a lot of the plus and minuses of variations in PPE. Face masks, we've looked at, I'll defer to Mr. Maz on this. Some clear face masks for children with that may need those. Along with the public schools, we're also working with the private schools, including Willie Ross, so they're looking at some of those sensory issues. So they're a good resource for a lot of that. A lot of it's really case by case basis. What the child can tolerate, and we realize, as we all sit here for many hours tonight with a mask on, how miserable it is. We need to look at those by case basis. And really a lot of this is based, and everything we're doing here is based on risk assessment. Can we interact with that kid for a period of time with a lower level of PPE? So certainly, we're providing the resources to the school to assess those. But again, I think a lot of it's going to be case by case. So.
Thank you both again.
We'll start moving on through the slides if everyone wants to see when their next question might come up. I have one about Tom on the district investments and resources page. Do we have any idea when we're going to hear about the most recent grant? That bottom one there that I can't really read. Coronavirus Relief Fund. Do we know when that's happening or when we might hear about it? Are you muted? Are you on there? Can you unmute yourself? I mean, I can hear you, but I'm not hearing you through this. Yeah? Okay.
So we have an application by the end of August. We're in the process of putting that together now. Best we can indicated that they would try to turn those around in a very quick time frame for in-person purchases. The grant itself is a little more flexible in allowing for expenses to be moved on to the dated back to March 1st.
Okay.
So it certainly is not hindering our ability to submit orders for any other safety.
Great, thank you. Yes, Gianna.
Thank you, Ryan. So this question would be for Tom as well. So thanks for letting me follow up. And for Nick Jorgantis, thank you so much for all the research that you've been doing with all the different ventilation and the filters. I know that I saw recently that the possibility of portable air purifiers. And Tom, I didn't know if that was something that one of those special grants could be used for, because I know that it would be an added expense to kind of what we were originally looking at, if I'm saying that correctly.
For submitting, purchasing air purifiers, we have some that we were able to the nurse's office and the medical waiting room probably would be the first areas, but we would also work with Nick in the facilities department to address any other areas where there may be some ventilation challenges.
I had a question about I think it's the high school. I know that Desi said that when it's possible to open the window, we should. But I think I remember last year someone saying with the ventilation system we have at the high school that the teachers are not supposed to open the windows. So I was just wondering what the rules going to be.
I think it'd be best if I defer to Facilities Director Nick Dragantis or Paul Dunkerley, who knows this building as well as anybody also, could assist with that. I think the air exchange here at the high school is something that will be to our benefit, but Nick or Paul, I think you probably can handle that better than I.
Sure. So we will have to do some experimentation of how opening windows and having all of our fresh air dampers on our air handling systems open 100% will affect the operation of these mechanics. So there will be some trial and error with it. However, I believe it's kind of common sense the way DESI guidance spells out. If you open windows, you will increase the fresh air into the building. So their function is going to be a priority for sure.
So we are planning on opening them?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Perhaps I can add to that just a little bit. Part of the plan as well is, or I would say presently before COVID, our air handling systems would shut down at night and go into what we call unoccupied mode, which would basically be a recirculation of air. So part of the plan now is that they're running at 100% wide open 24 hours a day, which eliminates the need for a cool down or a warm up depending on what season you're in at the beginning of the day. So when those systems won't be coming on, if you will, in the morning, temperature will be maintained throughout the day. So it'll be easier to regulate temperature when students and faculty come in when we open the windows than under the other circumstances. So we feel pretty good that we're going to be able to manage that, but it is going to require some experimentation. But the work that Nick and his staff have already done to change how the air handling systems are operating and also to increase to change the filters out should also be, really, really helpful. We feel very good about what's going to happen here at the high school.
Okay. Yeah.
Jamie, do you have a question?
I do. Thanks. Wow. Any better?
Try
now.
No. That's interesting.
How about now?
No, it's pretty annoying. Do you want to type your question to me, Jamie, and I'll read it out loud?
I will.
Okay, thank you. I'll have Gianna ask her question while you're typing.
Thanks, Ryan. This one's for Nick too, and sorry if this seems like a silly question. My custodian's my best friend at my school, so when we wanted to put some sensory kind of markings and little symbols on our floor, the chemicals and the stripping and the cleaning of the daily cleaning of the floor wouldn't allow for us to do that. So when you're talking about signage, especially on the floor and especially with the level of cleaning that we're going to be doing, I just don't know if you guys had thought about that or, just throwing it out there.
The plan is to get some main signage to remind everyone of social distancing measures, and then visual reminders, something as simple as some masking tape or painter's tape across the floor to mark distancing of 8 to 10 feet throughout our corridors. So as students and faculty are passing through, they're mindful of their gap in space between the person in front and behind them.
So that won't, you're not worried about that being pulled up with the daily extensive cleaning and stuff? Why not? You couldn't hear me, Nick?
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
All right, I'm muting myself and just. I'm just saying, you're not worried about stripping or the cleaning, the extensive cleaning with this, all the safety standards, pulling up that masking tape every other day.
I'm not. The masking tape would be durable enough for us, and should it pull up, it is inexpensive enough for us to easily replace. Honestly, the condition of the floors post-COVID is not really something of a priority right now, in my mind.
Yeah, I'm not worried about damage. I'm just worried about like you have to replace it every other day. I just think.
So in other instances throughout the district, we've used tape on the grounds to mark things, and they do remain relatively durable.
Okay, everyone, I have Jamie's question. And then, do you want to, is it on the same topic as Gianna's? Okay, Jamie's is different also. Jamie, I'd like to clarify if the September 15th start date is required, or if we can start school normally and utilize the 10 days at another point during the school year. And then he has a follow-up for Beverly on how many cases there are currently in Long Meadow. So Marty, you want to take the first part about when we
Sure.
have 10 days?
I think we will know more tomorrow. We have a statewide call with the commissioner, and that is item 1A for me to get some clarity on that question, what our flexibility and options are with that 180-day waiver that has been agreed to at the state level between DESE and various education associations. So you're asking, Jamie, the same question that I'm asking at this point. My preliminary answer is that the days have to be used in advance of the school year, in advance of the instructional year for students. So we will know more, I hope, by tomorrow afternoon on that. Good question.
So the understanding is right now it's not up to us. The commissioner is telling us these are the first 10 days, correct?
He's telling us that you can use those 10 days prior to the start of school. How we use or the number of days that we use and whether we're required to use those days, I think is something that I need some clarity on still.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So Beverly, the second question was, could you respond to how many cases there are currently in Long Meadow?
As of today, and that changes every single day, but currently there are about 7 cases that are in isolation. And I don't have the number that are in quarantine today. Those would be contacts of these cases. But this number has fluctuated within the last month from 1 case to 10 cases. But it has stayed in that general range now for probably at least the last month or month and a half. Ranging from a couple to no more than 7 or 8 cases that we're currently watching on a daily basis. That's the cases we know. People that have symptoms, have never bothered to get tested, and just feel they'll just sit at home. And, I have no idea, but about that, and that would be we just have to go on the experts nationwide who do feel that there is a multiple of people who have had COVID but have never been tested for one reason or another.
Thank you. Susie, you had a question?
Yes, I just had a question related to the facilities, in particular, since we know that outdoors is certainly a safer venue for any kind of activities. If we've considered that all in the plan of how students can, you know, achieve any kind of learning experience outdoors.
I'd say that we have talked quite a bit about that. I think we would want to give some professional discretion to our teachers to bring students outside, weather permitting and space permitting. I think we recognize that that's a great opportunity for kids to get some fresh air and perhaps a mask break. The problem, obviously, in New England is that you can't really, I'd say, build a plan on that. I think it will be a situational day-to-day opportunity for us. And I'm not sure if any of the principals have any additional thoughts on that, but we would want to access outdoor education when we can, understanding that we still have a responsibility to the remote learners during those time periods as well. So.
Thank you.
Bronwyn?
I was also just curious about, I guess this is also maybe for Nick, the situation at Glenbrook. Are we still following, will we be in alignment with the DESE requirements, even though we don't have classroom, like the full walls, so to speak?
So the layout of Glenbrook, oddly in this situation, lends to better air exchange. The way that the air handling systems are set up is that in the center of the hallways, air is drawn to that area. So that'd be away from the windows. The students would be drawing in the fresh air from the windows through the classrooms and into the hallways. I know we've always discussed closing those rooms, but right now it's actually working to our advantage.
So it's, I'm not sure how, so even though it's not in like a fully enclosed classroom, it's still okay, like as far as the DESE guidelines goes, and as long as they're 6 feet apart, like inside the actual walls that do exist.
Yeah, it increases our capability of drawing air from the outside and bringing it into our air handling system where the returns are set up in the hallways, just because of the open layout.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm just wondering, I think this might be a question for Ms. Hirschhorn. Not to circle it back to Fred, but back to the vaping question. You were saying that your concern would be sort of students being really close together while engaging in that activity. And it actually is possible, maybe a question more for Nick as far as facilities go. Sanford and Mass General have been about concerns that because of the vaping activity, you breathe in and then are expelling particles from your respiratory system. That while some of the larger respiratory droplets might be not a problem in the long term because of how quickly they might dissipate or sink, that the minute aerosols actually can linger in the air for longer. So I'm curious, because on the ventilation system that we might want to be looking at portable air purifiers for high-risk areas, knowing that especially at high school, bathrooms are sort of the hotspot for vaping to happen. Is there a consideration that might be a place to look into extra air purification to ensure that that's not a concern for students coming in and out?
Yeah, absolutely. Any smaller confined areas with less ventilation are good candidates for those devices.
Tiana?
Superintendent, I think somebody asked this at our task force meeting, but I don't know if we addressed it. What will happen if one school is maybe not meeting the standards of safety? Like, do all the schools stay closed, or what happens if one school doesn't meet the standards?
And to be clear, are you asking in situations where it might be for on a limited basis, that there might be some correction that needs to be done, or would it be like a long-term problem perhaps? In other words, I guess my first thought would be to consider whether or not we can put some corrections in place at that one school in short order, and then make a decision that way. But if the school were offline for an extended period of time, I think we'd have some decisions to make about how that impacts kids across the district. Certainly there are times when we have challenging winters where one school has, broken pipe or some HVAC issues, and we have to take one school offline for a day. But if it were for an extended period of time, I think we'd have to gather to think about how that affects the entire district, and whether or not we can run one school on a fully remote basis while others have a hybrid schedule.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question that's similar. I guess maybe, Tom, this might be for you as well, or actually for everybody. A couple of times in the presentation, it's that we need an adequacy of PPE and sanitation supplies. Has the state government given us a per pupil, this is what you need in order to be functioning first semester, second semester? Like, do we know how much we need per kid? And is it different elementary to high school? How is that being determined that we have an adequate amount?
Mr. Maz is going to tackle that for us.
This would make it sound better if you actually want me to talk with it on. It's harder for people to hear you. The state did provide us with some guidance earlier this summer in regards to what PPE is needed based on a weekly usage for students and staff. They outlined in terms of masks, gowns, shields, N95 level masks. So we did plan for having enough PPE based on their recommendation for approximately 12 weeks based on what we purchased. So obviously, depending upon the plan and the number of kids that are in school at a given time, most certainly could impact that. So that was the foundation in terms of how we made our calculation on how much we need.
Thank you. So I'm on page 5 of the paper slides, which is around 20 on the, I'm going to do the math and multiply by 4. So I don't know if anyone has another question in this area. Rhonda?
Thanks. We might have passed this part of it, but for the pre-K 2 opening, they're going to be able to use the other classrooms where the 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders would be, to make sure there's no more than, say, 15 students, like the diagram shows, or to make sure that they're more, like at least 6 feet apart.
Yeah, certainly the space needs of the pre-K program is pretty intensive, given the intensive needs of some of the students there. So Principal Nelson is taking a look at using all available and alternative spaces within the building. And we're confident right now that we can offer that pre-K program with the spacing that we need. Of course, you can't use all the 3 through 5 classrooms because those students will be there on a reduced cohorted basis. But we definitely are exploring all the spaces available to us. And that's been part of the DESE guidance right along, is to ask schools to do that pressure testing and look to see if alternative spaces can be used throughout the school day. So I think we'll need to, right now, I couldn't identify for you. I don't think Principal Nelson could identify for you the specific rooms and spaces that we would access.
Oh, I don't. Yeah, I was just making sure. Some people were worried that if we're going to do the opening for those grades, that there aren't going to be any classes where there's students that are closer than 6 feet apart.
Correct. So the six, well, I think I might ask Pupil Services Director to jump in here, or Principal Nelson. We recognize that students that are in those intensive programs or in the preschool program have very specific learning needs, and that there might be times where students might need close staff contact. And it's in those situations that we've provided, that we will need to provide additional PPE, the shields, the gowns, whatever is required. So that there'll be some very specific protocols for the contact that might have to happen in those programs. And I think Beth Nelson or Jean Fontaine might provide a better answer to that question, but we recognize that the 6 foot standard in those cases might be a challenge, just because of the activity levels of a typical 3 or 4 year old. So
only for pre-K it's going to be a challenge, or
only
for K1 and 2 going to be 6 feet no matter what? Only
for pre-K, and not to minimize how much work our teachers will need to do to separate, kindergartners, first graders, and second graders, and that's part of that work that we'll need to do at the beginning of the year to familiarize kids with the new expectations and new routines. But I would ask, maybe Beth or Jean to jump in on the distancing and the safety in that pre-K program, if that's what you're asking about.
Just wondering in general, especially seeing they aren't going to be wearing masks.
Well, I will say one of the things that we want to understand is the extent to which we can have masking requirements that go beyond the DESE guidance. And so that is something that we're still exploring. And we'd want, if that's a kind of an important factor, we could try to do some legwork on that between now and your next meeting. But I don't know, Jean or Beth, if you have anything you want to add to that.
I would just like to add that we'll plan on the 6 foot space, and we're trying to keep those preschoolers within that distance, so that the space is allocated. But just the nature of the position in the preschool, and especially the students with disabilities in the preschool, staff will be closer. But we do, like Marty said, we have the protocol and the PPE to ensure safety for staff and students. Some of our summer students that had in-home services this summer, one of the things that we were working on with our more intense needs students is mask compliance. Even though they may not be required to have a mask at school, our students with significant needs, they need it in the community. So it was really important. I heard from parents to please help them training their children to use masks. So that would be, for some students, an educational goal, the mask compliance. Beth, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I guess the only other thing I'd add, can you hear me all? Okay. The only other thing that I would add with regards to the K1 and 2 classrooms, Blueberry Hill and Wolf Swamp have a very similar floor plan. Center has a little bit larger classrooms. So what Principal Stack and I have done is considered other spaces that we could utilize that are larger, where if, for example, my first grade classrooms are some of my smallest footprints, being creative in using other space that does have a larger square footage, so we can fit all of the students into a classroom at a safe 6 foot distance. So for example, my music room, the art room, they're larger spaces, the library, and then just utilizing even the consideration of possibly my 5th grade classrooms are a lot larger than my 1st and 2nd grade classrooms. So do we have to maybe swap placement of those classrooms for the year? I don't know if that answers. And then I think Mrs. Fontaine answered everything about the preschool, but certainly utilizing other spaces because our current therapy room, if you would call it that, is too small to do the 6-foot spacing. So we would probably separate out those students into 1 or 2 other spaces for their therapy.
Nicole, you have a question?
I'm just wondering, maybe we were talking about switching, possibly moving classrooms, et cetera, to give more space. Is there any way that you can address sort of how the day might look different maybe at that age? I know traditionally that's more of a play-based. Do we have additional staff to make it easier for pre-K and kindergarten teachers especially, I think, to ensure that adequate spacing while also having the opportunity to do, you know, developmentally appropriate things? A full day, of course, for younger kids is tricky if we're trying to also keep them 6 feet away and more stationary than we may be used to.
So I think, again, I'll say we have wonderful educators at all 3 of our schools that are, reaching out to us constantly, providing ideas. There's some wonderful footprints for, kindergarten students being perhaps maybe on yoga mats with a lap desk, and that could work in a preschool setting as well, so that it's not as stationary and it's still looking inviting and developmentally appropriate, but certainly we understand that we might not be doing housekeeping or Legos or magnetiles or painting this year. And that will be very different for us, but I'm sure our educators will be committed to finding creative ways to still give our children and our students choice and opportunities for that play and socialization. It's just going to look different than we're traditionally accustomed to having.
I'm just curious about the rationale for the Wednesday half day for the K1 and 2 students, and then going home and doing remote learning. I'm wondering about the cognitive shift that those kids have to make from being in school learning and then going home and then doing remote learning. And I'm just wondering if there was any cognitive advantages making the Wednesday at home cleaning day for those grade points. Just again, I'm wondering what the rationale was, where that came from. You can speak to
that. So just so I'm clear, Susie, are you wondering if were you suggesting that it might be better just to take it as a full cleaning day and that a half day might be more counterproductive, or would you say that we ought to keep the kids with us all day? I think there might be some room that we have on that question.
Yeah.
I think how that half day. I think one of the things we recognize that the teachers will need some time for planning and collaboration, even at those grades, and then
for sure.
The other piece of it is the cleaning and disinfection work that we want to do even in the pre-K 1 and 2 classrooms. And so having everyone out of the buildings to do that chemical disinfectant, I think is important. But, that is something that if the committee would like us to, take a deeper dive on that or bring back some additional information, we'd be happy to do that. And I think maybe our principals have some thoughts as well on using that as a half day for our K1-2 students.
I appreciate you taking the just taking it and considering it, because it just, I don't know,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem, yeah.
I think the other piece that I heard you say, Susie, was you were worried about the continuity of learning in the classroom to shifting to remote. And I don't necessarily see it as like a teacher standing in front of them synchronously teaching in the afternoon, because they're going to be collaboratively planning with their colleagues. But perhaps there's a project or a task that they're working on at home, or maybe it could be even a scavenger hunt or something that is tangible that they can bring back for the next day.
Okay, yeah, maybe more enrichment. That sounds better. Like, it just, you know, my head went to a schema that probably, like, it's just that shift from what they
Sure.
were doing to then the afternoon coming home, and yeah.
All right, I see you, Brian. I'm gonna hold on. Jamie typed in a few questions. So Marty, once again, about a K-2 required to wear masks. They are, we're looking into it, or they are not at this point.
We are looking into that. I think we'll have a more definite answer for you at your next meeting. But we'd like to explore whether or not we can have a more restrictive mask requirement than is recommended by DESE. Yes.
Thank you. And Jamie's second question was probably for the admins, what might lunch and recess look like for elementary level students?
I could defer to some of our elementary principals.
I'll take it. So I'm looking at a few different schedules right now. One would be 6 different lunches with each grade level. Kindergarten having 25 minutes, first grade, and all other grades 20 minutes in the cafeteria. That way I would be able to, I have 15 tables in the cafeteria. I'd be able to seat 4 students 6 feet apart. And then the partition, so it'd kind of be like 1 here, 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 and here. And then recess would likely, instead of it being a grade level recess, as we've traditionally had, classrooms taking recess play breaks throughout the day. So maybe a morning one and an afternoon, 2 shorter ones, to make sure that we're limiting the number of students on the playscape or playground at any one time, but also giving the mask break the opportunity to get outside, get some fresh air, and run around. So, but I also, with the cohort A and B, 3rd, 4th, and 5th will have smaller cohorts. So I may be able to put more grade levels in the cafeteria at a time. We just have to get the numbers and find out who's really going to be in front of us, and then plan accordingly.
And one of the goals is for us to keep, even when you have multiple cohorts in the CAF, to keep your cohorts together and not mixing. So yeah, we're all having fun with that. Oh, sorry. Good questions, Jamie. Rob, would you like to hand up?
And this was just actually a follow-up to Susie's. I was just thinking, in the event that we eventually did have to go remote, maybe a remote day for the K-2 or pre-K-2, whatever it is there, would serve useful. You know, are we assuming that we're going to be able to go all year with them in class? I'm just curious if that might be like an adjustment period. So if it did happen, they'll be more ready than they would be, maybe.
It would be if we were fully remote that day for even the K-1-2 students, right. Yeah, that they might be better positioned to transition to an all remote arrangement. Yeah. You know, that's something that we'll do some additional thinking on that. And I'd say that, you know, with all of these models, as we've said a few times tonight, we need to be prepared to be nimble and flexible based on, you know, changing conditions and changing information. Beth said something that's very important, that we need to understand, you know, how many students will be returning to us in the fall, and we'll have to ask parents that, you know, again, in increasingly specific ways, so that we understand how many students might wind up in each cohort, because that impacts so much of what the principals will need to do in terms of scheduling lunches and recesses and classes. So, but I'd say, you know, we welcome some any additional feedback the committee might have and what that Wednesday will look like for our pre-K to 2 students. And we, as I said earlier, we've got some work to do with the staff as well to make sure we have some common understandings about how that day should look and work. So.
I have a question that somebody asked about Wednesdays. So I have a question about Wednesdays, and it's kind of for the admin. So it says in here that they'd be doing all their classes, but at the high school, if you did 8 blocks from 8 to 11, you'd get 22 minutes per class. So are we doing a week 1, week 2? Are you doing only core? What might be the plan for them actually seeing teachers on Wednesday? Because it seems to me that there's not enough time to see all the classes, particularly at the high school level. Please, Mr. Dunkley, yeah. Turn mine back on. Shout. I know I can hear you, but I'm not sure about people watching us on Zoom. Are you just muted? Let me go find you. There you are. Try. Oh, no. We both did it at the same time. Try again. Try to unmute yourself again. Yeah. Try again by yourself. Or do I have to do it? There we go.
All right. I think I'm good.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for the thumbs up, everyone. Yeah, so the Wednesday is a check-in. There will be 8 blocks. We anticipate that's probably going to go the full morning. So probably going to course something close to, from 10 of 8 till almost noon time for everybody to get those things in. Each teacher has 5 blocks that they teach. And each student has 6 blocks of classes that they take, plus a wellness class. So it's not perfect, but we think we can do enough of the check-ins there, make sure that we're reaching everybody that we need to. If we need to pivot on that a little bit, if what we're starting off with isn't working appropriately, we can make that change. Part of the beauty of what the high school's got for a program is the fact that we do have 70 minutes in front of the kids each time one of the blocks meets. We also have time with our students in some of the ice blocks during that X block in the middle. And we're going to build some time in to make sure that we can make contact with students beyond just those group contacts on Wednesday morning. Part of that is also built so that we are contacting individual students and families in case somebody is struggling. So, but I have to defer and say, yeah, it's not perfect, but we think we can manage it.
Thank you. Looking around, I'm on page 7 of our document. Oh, Jamie has a question. Marty, when we get through phase 2 controlled reopening, what's next? Has DESE provided guidance as to when the next cohorts would be going full time, or is it a town decision?
Sorry. It would be a local decision if we had to move to a more restricted model, or if we were permitted to bring additional students back. It would be a town decision, hopefully one that is informed by the feedback that we get from stakeholders and obviously informed by the local metrics that the Board of Health and our emergency manager provides to us, but a town decision.
Thank you. I have 2 more questions that I wrote down on this page. One you did mention, but I think it's important to reiterate. So if you look at these potential schedules at all the levels, the kids that are at home in a hybrid seem to be on their screen. But would the plan be for the staff to be doing mini lessons that the kids would watch, and then they're doing paperwork projects? The kids at home I'm referring to, just like in the classroom, you don't want the teacher speaking at them for 45 minutes Instead, it's a snippet, and then the kids are doing things so they're off their screen. Is that part of what the teachers are working on?
That's part of what we're working on is to understand how that connection can be made. We wouldn't want students to be with their laptops or Chromebooks open full time during an instructional block, and we wouldn't expect that of staff either. And so it's, you know, there would be mini lessons, there would be that synchronous engagement, there would be opportunities to set students up to do that independent work that you described. But, you know, I think we would want to allow teachers to exercise their professional discretion on how they use that synchronous time with their students who might be at home. So, you know, and that's going to look very different at different levels. I know our principals or administrators that here could describe, you know, what that conceivably could be at the elementary, middle, or high school level. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in. You know, I know we talked about how like the workshop model, for example, might look or feel in this arrangement at the elementary level, or it could be at the high school level that a teacher is providing. Maybe it's a recorded lesson. Maybe it's an actual synchronous check-in. There's so many blended learning strategies that I think our staff are picking up on now. That students might be working in a Google Doc simultaneously. Students might be doing an online discussion of some sort. Sue, I don't know if you have anything that you might want to add to that on how that connection could be made. I think it's an important part of the work that we have in front of us between now and the start of school.
Yep, so you described it pretty well. I think probably an introduction or a mini lesson, and then some opportunity for some independent or group work, grouping the kids through a Zoom session with students at home, potentially, something like that. And then opportunity to demonstrate learning towards the end of the class, and you know, exit ticket kind of check-in at the end, and probably a lot of flipped classroom strategies as well for that.
So that leads to a follow-up question I think is important. Sorry, you'll probably be able to answer right now too. This is going to be, it's all tied in.
Okay.
Because we need to take remote attendance for the kids who aren't there. So their attendance is their physical or their virtual participation in the classwork that might be going on the way you just described it, Google Groups or however they're doing it on a Google Doc or something.
Yeah, we're leaning,
Go ahead.
leaning towards the exit, being the attendance basically, because to participate in the exit strategy.
So, well, I think I wanted to make this point. One, what is the mechanism for tracking their attendance other than their contribution to a Google Doc or something like that? And two, it's kind of like to tell the parents, oh, by the way, your children who are at home, and I'm talking to myself because I had two very poor remote learners, that they're going to be required to actually be logging in and doing things at the appropriate time. It's a reminder to all the families that DESE is basically saying to us, when you're remote, you need to actually be involved or engaged. So I would like to know the mechanism so that families could be aware of what I need to be saying to my sons. This is what you better be doing, because I'm not even going to be there, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a couple of mechanisms. One is the teaching strategies, the instructional techniques become part of the mechanism, but I'm certain that there'll also be a formal reporting process that we will have to follow with the department in the same way that we take attendance under normal circumstances. So we actually just checked in with our student information systems manager, and she wasn't aware of any new processes that DESE has put in place in terms of the actual mechanism to collect and report student attendance. But we will definitely have a process in place to take attendance in the way that you described. And it could just be the work product that kids have to provide to a teacher, or it could be physical attendance in the way that we are used to. So.
Go ahead, Amy.
No.
Try to turn up. So one thing we're really committed to also is maintaining some of the great things that we have by way of piece of practice, and that means our ELL teacher, our special educators, professionals, classroom teachers, coaches. So if you look at the blue dot model, maybe you could pull that, we call it the blue dot. So this shows a little bit of what the support could look like. And so the synchronous connection could be with the classroom teacher, but also with members of that grade level support group, which you actually said each classroom is going to get that level of support. So
Okay, yep, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Grade level
That's
support.
a very important clarification.
Yeah. Otherwise, but so really looking at ways that we can creatively engage kids in the classroom and at home using that support team Monday through Friday. I'm not sure about Wednesdays. To have kids be engaged, whether they're sitting in front of you in the classroom or sitting at home. Does that make sense? Okay.
Thank you. I wrote a lot down in this section, so I'm going to call myself again. And then I see you back there. You me next. What are the responsibilities, Marty, of teachers who are remote? So they've a doctor's note that says I can't come to work. What is going to be their requirements and responsibilities?
So at the elementary level, they might be part of that team that Amy just described. At the middle level, I expect the same thing. That I think part of it is we just need to understand how many teachers might wind up being remote because of some limitation. So the answer to your question might just depend on how many are in that situation. If it's more than we anticipate, then we'll have to think about some different models perhaps, but they would be there to support students who are working remotely. They could be expected to push lessons in. Mr. Dunkerley, who just had to leave just now, he and I were talking about what would happen if let's say a teacher of an advanced high school class had some limitations and they had to be remote. We would think about ways to either reschedule those students or perhaps push the lessons into the school to the kids who happen to be in school. So you might have an arrangement where you have a teacher working remotely, pushing lessons into a classroom that is perhaps monitored by another staff member who doesn't necessarily have to be a licensed teacher. So I think that it will look different at each grade level. At the elementary level, they'll be part of that blue dot at the top of the diagram.
Thank you. And I'm going to stay on this topic, but I'm going to call Nicole first. My next question will be on this topic.
I have a question. It's possible that DESE might provide clear enough guidance on this that it won't be our decision, but assuming that DESE gives full reign for school districts to decide on this attendance issue themselves, to what extent have we considered or will we be considering the flexibility that might be needed for some families, especially because we're grouping cohorts by families, that we may see circumstances where older siblings are responsible for younger siblings, or parents might be needed to help younger students access the curriculum and the online learning tasks, but might be working from home also and might not have sort of that flexibility to make sure that their student is physically present for each of those, well, virtually physically present for each of those scheduled times. Has there been any conversation as far as like how some of that can be made flexible as needed for families?
Well, to begin, students living under the same roof would be in the same cohort, regardless of last name, but if they're under the same roof, they're in the same cohort. So I want to make sure I understand your question. Are you asking if one member of one child in the household needs to be fully remote, but perhaps another child is participating with us remotely. Is that what you're?
I think I'm more saying like during the days that you're home. So if you're in cohort B, on Monday and Tuesday, you and your siblings are all at home.
Right.
It is possible that for some of our families, we may find that on those days where their students are home, there may be an older sibling who needs to be sort of in charge of the younger sibling on those days if parents are still working. Or there may be parents who are working from home. And so the synchronous piece might not be, synchronous piece might be tricky for all of these blocks for all of these hours. So
Gotcha.
I'm just curious sort of what flexibility we can offer families.
Meaning,
In that position.
meaning I suppose the rigidity, I don't know if I'd call it rigidity, but the preciseness of the schedule could be a challenge for families that need that flexibility at home.
Taking attendance for those things as opposed to having students kind of asynchronously join back.
Sure. Yeah. I suspect much of that will have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, but you bring up a great point. In our effort to create predictable routines for children, we need to understand that there are times when families are going to need that flexibility. I would say that's when we just need to have those conversations between administrators and teachers and families just to see what flexibilities we can offer. So that's I think every situation will be different, but we recognize that. I think with the preciseness of the schedule, with the predictability of the schedule, even within that schedule, there'll be opportunities for independent work that the students can engage in and perhaps do at a more convenient time. But I think loud and clear, we heard about the importance of those synchronous connections and the predictable routines. But you have to balance that in situations where families need some flexibility. Yeah.
I just want to clarify something for just basically for everybody watching. If somebody has a K-2 sibling and then a not K-2 sibling, the not K-2 sibling is not going every day just because they have a pre-K-2 kid in their family. So although you're in the same cohort is 3 to 12, and then your pre-K-2s would be the everyday ones, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So those older kids aren't thinking that they're coming every day like their youngest sibling. Or anything on the topic? Just, remote learning question? Go ahead.
It's two pieces. So, sorry.
That's right. There we go. Can you hear me now? Excellent. I just had a question. So the parents who don't send their children back, doesn't seem like they're going to be able to access the remote options that we're directly providing from the schools, because it's contingent. Those remote options are contingent upon being present for at least 2 days if you're in grades 3 through 12, or 4.5 days if you're in pre-K to 2. So what I saw in the deck was that you're considering 5 different options that DESE is promoting. Can you give us any indication, especially for parents who are out there who are wondering if they're going to, who've already made the decision or are moving towards that decision? What will the district be providing to them? Because I know of people who are actually cobbling together homeschool programs to try to support the learning for their children. And I said in a previous meeting, and I'm saying it again, that I think we need to do better than that for folks in this situation.
Mm-hmm. So the DESE guidance came out on the 24th. They offered 5 different ways that districts could support children who aren't able to report to school or whose families aren't comfortable sending them back to school. They ranged from a sort of a full-blown virtual academy constructed by districts in-house to a learning management system that children are given access to. I honestly, my best answer is that we'll have to give you a more precise answer to that next week. We're still unpacking that guidance and understanding how we might deliver services to those children who are not able to participate in any in-person learning. There's a couple of sides to this. One is we've heard from some families that need a sort of standardized learning management system that they can access in the most flexible manner possible. In other words, they have a family schedule that will not permit their children to access our teachers during the regular instructional day, and they would like something that offers maximum flexibility so kids can progress through a learning management system at night, on the weekends, whenever. And then there's other families that are not comfortable sending their kids in for health reasons, but they would be able to access our teachers if our teachers can provide that support. So a huge part of the answer to your question is for us to specifically identify the families that fall into those categories that aren't able to send their children, or there's some underlying medical condition that the child has. And it might wind up being that we exercise different options for different families. Nicole Allen at our task force meeting yesterday, she gave the example of if there were a large enough cohort of students at a particular grade level that needed to opt out of any in-person instruction, if the cohort were large enough, our first option would be to look to sort of assign a remote teacher perhaps to that cohort. It becomes more of a challenge when that number is smaller. If there's only, say, one child that needs, an 8th grade algebra experience, in those cases, we might look at purchasing an online course. So I think we need to paint a more precise picture for you next week so you can make an informed vote on that. But my sense is that we would have to cobble together a few different strategies depending on what families need. There might be some families that say, just give me some online learning management platform and we'll take care of it ourselves. And there might be other families that say, we really need that connection between your staff and our child at home. And it will very much depend on the capacity that we have internally, but also the number of students that need to access those programs. So I would say you can expect us to give you a more specific plan on that next week. And I don't know if that, I hope I'm doing justice to that. If any of our administrative team wants to jump in, feel free, but it's a complex, but really important question.
No, I appreciate especially the thinking about how can we, if there's a possibility of deploying our current staff, in those situations when there is a, critical mass of students who could potentially be served by a faculty member or two from the district. Yeah, for sure. And then I just had a follow-up on the same, do you want to go to somebody else or is that okay? Okay. Just from I know we've been talking about remote learning in like so many different ways and looking at schedules and things like that. But when we actually I say when, because it seems like when is more, I'm just trying to be realistic. When we move to a fully remote sort of situation, if we find ourselves in that position this year, you feel confident that these schedules, these plans, these best case options would be followed and would basically set the standard for what remote learning would then look like going forward if we were all remote.
I do, and we're talking at a fairly high level about the key tenets, and we've outlined a framework and schedules that provide that foundation, and knowing that we have some work to do in terms of reaching really specific understandings with staff about what the expectations will be, but I'm confident that the models that we've put in front of you work based on what we know today and understanding, I've said it earlier, and this goes off your question a little bit, but so much can change. This is all contingent on our local metrics. It's contingent on the health and safety protocols. It's contingent on our capacity, its staffing levels. It's contingent on availability of PPE, all those things. So, but I am confident, to answer your question, I'm confident that we have a framework and some principles in place to make this work, whether, for students who are in a hybrid arrangement, but even if we had to transition to fully remote for all students. And I agree with you, Susie. I think we all recognize that we're in this for the long haul, and it's very possible that, given the trajectories, that we could find ourselves in an all remote arrangement. We have to be prepared for that. I think a lot of the strategies that teachers are learning right now, the idea is that they can be employed in this hybrid arrangement or in a fully remote arrangement. So I hope that helps. And I hope I'm answering your question. If I'm not, I definitely would love to engage some of our principals here, because they've thought so much about this, what this could look like at the classroom level.
The speaking of that, just to piggyback off of that, because I know some of the professional learning that folks have been engaging in has been really great, and it comes highly recommended, and that's fantastic. Would we, I know you just got this information yesterday, but is it possible that for those first 10-ish days we could secure that outside vendor? I think it's Better Lesson, right? Is it possible that we can secure them for those days? And again, knowing that you just got this information yesterday.
It's possible. Yes, I think how we use those days and how much additional resources and time we can invest in Better Lesson. We've had great success with them. It's been well received, and we would want to continue. If it's not Better Lesson, we'd want to continue to set up staff with opportunities to learn some of those remote learning strategies, remote teaching strategies. No doubt.
I raised your hand up. My question's on the same topic as yours, on the same as well. Okay. So thinking about remote, if the situation changes in the next 2 weeks, or if it changes in January, February, Tom, will we be getting guidance from the governor about our budget, and maybe we have to look into furloughs on staff that maybe aren't needed if we're a full remote school district? Is that something that we would look at if that situation comes up?
I think if we are in a remote learning environment, we would need to look at the expectations of our remote learning plan, the roles of each staff person in terms of their ability to support the objectives, and how we can ensure that they are supporting an engaging and positive experience for students. So I think we would have to do that analysis to determine what our staffing needs would be under a remote plan.
Thank you. And I guess it's hard to say, like, if there was a guess on how long we'd be at full remote. If we were to vote for this next week, let's just go full remote for the year, then that would be something you would definitely have to look at from a budget point of view. But if it's November and we think we're back in 3 weeks, then maybe we wouldn't. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense when remote learning begins and then how long it may last for. Will certainly have to be factored into that analysis.
Thank you. Gianna?
Thank you, Ryan. And Superintendent, I know you just kind of addressed this with Susie's question, but you and I, you know how I feel about this. I really want to emphasize how we need to focus on helping those families who are choosing to be remote full-time, because everything that Desi has said about, you know, wanting interactions and positive relationships and everything that the district is saying about social emotional supports and, you know, this positive experience that we're trying to provide, I feel strongly that that cannot be achieved with the online platform. So I'm grateful that you said it could be maybe be a case-by-case basis now for people who want to, like the people who need that flexibility to maybe choose that online platform. Because when I do the math, you know, we're still talking potentially 150 to 200 kids that could just be choosing, or their parents could be choosing. And I guess my question is, if we're going to be able to provide remote services through LPS staff and courses to kids who have to quarantine, or if they come back from traveling, and, you know, can we consider just adding the kids who are fully remote to cohorts, and then they just follow that cohort?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. I think the plans that we put in place for students on a short-term basis because they need to quarantine or travel restriction might be different than the plans that we would put in place for a student who's not able to participate in any in-person learning for a long period of time. The other thing, my hope is that when parents see the safety of the hybrid model that we're putting together, when they see the richness of the experience, when they see all the protocols that we have in place, that there will be parents that have that confidence that they can send their child to school for the in-person experience on a hybrid basis, and that they can do it safely, that they can trust that we have all the protective factors in place. And so that's why I think, you know, at some point soon we'll ask the question again, and we'll see if there are a different number of parents that signal to us that they'll need to opt their children out of any in-person learning. So I think, to echo what you said, you know, we may wind up looking at this on a case-by-case basis, you know, and what makes sense for a junior in high school who needs a chemistry experience is, you know, what we put together for that child might be different than what we put together for a child at the middle level or the elementary level. So, yeah, I think we haven't had a moment literally as an administrative team to talk about this part of the DESE guidance. It is so fresh. I've been asking the question for 2 months directly to the commissioner, what are our obligations to students who have to opt out? And the answer didn't come to our frustration. I think we have some better understanding now, and we'll come together as an administrative team and give you some clearer idea of what that component of our plan will look like next week.
Yeah, thank you for that, Superintendent. I know it's a huge, you know, issue, trying to meet the needs of everybody. It's hard to, in thinking about, there's, you know, there might be some parents, like you said, who, you know, see that the safety, you know, concerns have been addressed, and, you know, they have the confidence. I guess I'm also just thinking about kids who have, you know, aren't medically prescribed to stay home, but could have anxiety, could have other, you know, mental health issues that would limit their their desire, especially the older kids who know, you know, how they're going to be comfortable in learning. And with that, it's even more important to have those connections with the teachers and to be able to interact. You know, you're talking about peer-to-peer interactions with you know, the hybrid model. I just, you know, again, maybe it's 30 kids, maybe it's 150, maybe it's 200. I just feel it's important to be the voice for those students and those families, because for me, it's a huge difference between LPS teachers and curriculum and an online platform. It just doesn't seem comparable.
Yeah, and knowing that we have, you know, experience around serving students who are homebound for medical reasons, so there's a foundation of practice that we can build on there, and yeah, I think it's still, we'll be looking at things on a case-by-case basis, but come back to you with a better idea of what that could look like at the next meeting.
Thank you. Armin, did you have a question? I know we haven't called on you over there.
Yeah, I had a specific question for Mr. Dunker, actually. Talking about high-risk areas, I just wondering what the plans are for ICES, because a lot of people use the library for ICES, and it's often stable.
Great question, Armin. So ICES at the high school will look very, very different going forward. So part of what we're hoping that we can establish is that for juniors and seniors, that there would be more of an open campus feel for them, so that they would have the ability to leave when they do in class. It's part of what we put forward. It's still at that level of proposal. Freshmen and sophomores would be assigned to specific ICES. Part of the DESE guidance says that we have to have a specific seat for every child in every class. So those students would be assigned to ICES in a particular room and in a particular seat, just as if you were going to math or English. So that should address that. The library is going to be repurposed, and it will probably be used as a regular classroom to manage some of the larger cohorts that we had, where the number of students that have subscribed to a particular class is greater than we can handle in a regular ed classroom. So you're going to see the library take on a different use in that regard for some blocks. We may have some blocks of ICES in there as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And just to follow up to that, is there any talk of using the plexiglass inside of the cafeteria as more of a space for collaboration?
So we looked at that, and one of the biggest challenges that we have in this building is actually being able to serve lunch. So we looked at using the existing tables as they are. We looked at the existing tables with plexiglass dividers, and then we looked at desks and chairs. Desks and chairs give us the greatest density and still allow us to maintain the 6-foot distancing. So that's the option that we're going to go with at the high school. We have, and it does two things. One, again, it gives us the greatest chance to put the most people in the cafeteria as possible. The overflow is going to be the gym and in the bleachers. And we won't need to use the library in this particular case for overflow. That was our other thought if we needed to do that. The other thing that it's just a reality of the situation is if we are approved to go with a hybrid model, one of the things we have to do is we have to pull the excess furniture out of all the classrooms. So you're going to see things like 2 of the seminar spaces get set up as classrooms, the library will get desks and chairs, and the cafeteria will get desks and chairs. Again, it makes better use of the space, but it also alleviates another problem with storage. And it gives students the appropriate desk and the appropriate chair for all of the activities here in school. So does that help?
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. Still have a question? Absolutely, good. Any more questions? Anyone?
So I guess I'm interested to ask a big picture question, which is next week we're going to be asked to vote on this plan. And right now it seems to me like we're voting yes or no on a plan. it doesn't seem like we have options. And so I know that we're 3+ hours in. I don't know if this is a great question for 3+ hours in, but it would be really nice to know what other options were if you've had time to come up with other options.
I think you have the option to sort of select components of the plan. I think you have the option to ask us to come back with a plan that brings more students in. I think you have the option to ask us to pull back on having the pre-K to 2 students in. I think you have the option to direct us on how to support remote learners, students that are exclusively remote. I'd say that the schedules that we've developed would translate if the committee decided that we wanted to be fully remote, let's say, the schedules that we've developed will translate nicely into that fully remote model. You know, we would still want to maintain the schedules that we've described to you tonight. So I don't know if that's helpful or if there's, you know, we've committed to the August 4th as a date potentially for a school committee decision on it. You always have the option of asking us to model or bringing back some additional information on something. And you could have another meeting anytime after the 4th, up until the time that we have to submit to DESE on August 10th. So I hope that's helpful. But I think you create options by perhaps grabbing components from the framework that we put forward here. But we could create space for additional options by, you know, having another meeting after the 4th.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we necessarily need another meeting. I think that what you said clarifies for me that we have a overarching plan, and having discussions about some aspects of that plan may be where we can push on some of the edges. But I think it's helpful for me. I wasn't sure what we were going to have tonight, whether it was going to be options A, B, C, and D, or I think what we have right now, which is an overarching framework, and we can have discussions about some pieces of that framework. But I think that's more in line where we are than we have 5 options, pick your favorite one. Is that a fair way for me to think about it?
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. I think you could, if you felt that the, you know, the health and safety protocols and strategies that we had in place didn't make sense, and you felt that we could only open on a hybrid basis for all students, that certainly would be an option for the committee. I think it's a matter of, yeah, what parts of the model would you not want to adopt, or what parts of the model would you want to expand, I suppose.
So just from a procedural standpoint, the idea would be that somebody can make a motion on a particular plan, can have discussion where we can amend and change the plan. So just from the sake of like what we might be doing, someone could say, everybody goes to school, and we would all vote no, hopefully, and then everybody fully remote, or some version of hybrid. And that, if you want to do that, that's something that we could play with in our meeting. Make sense?
I was just gonna say, that being the case, if there is an opportunity for us to take a deeper look, I'm wondering if you think it's a good idea to survey the pre-K to 2 parents separately with the, how do you feel about going back, like, all in? As opposed to, already we have 20% saying, and that could go to 15, it could go to 25, I'm not sure. 20% is a lot. How many is that? 500-ish?
Yeah, almost.
Okay. So that has me concerned for the remote learning, those 5 options. I think it's going to be important that we do have all of them. But I didn't know how people felt about having pre-K 2 parents surveyed separately. Because if we voted on that, and let's say that we voted to have those students go back, and then we found out that a large percentage of the parents were thinking, that's crazy, I'm not going to send my kid full time.
Yeah.
Or we could get, it could be the same. A lot of them that say that they are going to send them.
We
just don't know.
I think I wouldn't be opposed to a separate survey for our pre-K to 2 students. The survey data that I'm projecting now, that I'm sharing, we could break that out for you by grade level. Of course, the answer that parents provide now based on tonight's presentation might be different than the answer that we received on July 23rd. So that would
potential to opt out of hybrid.
Correct. That's the potential to opt out. So that would be our current arrangement being hybrid. We have about, when I took this snapshot, it might have changed a little bit, but when I took this snapshot, it was 12.4% of parents signaled to it. And my initial pass through on that didn't suggest that it was more skewed towards, one grade span or another. But so we could, if it would be helpful to the committee, it would be easy enough to send a specific survey out to our pre-K to 2 families and say, this is what we're recommending. Here's how it's going to look. Here's how it's going to work. Would you be, based on this new information, would your child be participating in the model?
I think it would be helpful overall, but everyone else.
Yeah. Sure.
I'm wondering if we might want to include in that survey an additional question for those parents, asking them if they had an alternate option of sending their children on the hybrid basis, would they prefer them? Just so we can get a picture of, are they saying they're not going to come all, or are they saying they're not going to come if it's full time? Lay out all the options so that they're able to give us a clear picture of where they are at that age.
Yeah.
So we're not conflating groups.
Right.
And Superintendent, you might have said this already, but could we also collect more specific data on the 12.4% who, could we ask if it's medically prescribed, if it's convenience of scheduling, or if it's
we have that information. Yeah, that was part of the survey that's depicted here. We drilled a little bit deeper with families and said, if you indicated that you needed to opt out, is it because you don't feel safe sending your child back, or is there some underlying medical situation?
Oh, good.
So we have that. We could, basically we could ask it again. I think families. It might be better to get up-to-date data based on up-to-date plans. You know, this is, the way I think about this is we started out here and we're narrowing this down considerably. You know, we're getting to that place where we can, with greater clarity, explain what the year is going to look like. And then families, I think, appreciate that because then they can make more informed decisions, you know, and you know, in full. Understandably, many parents wrote back, not many, but we had some parents write back and say, well, I'm having a hard time answering the survey because I don't really know what the plan is. And I respect that. I totally understand that. And I might have had the same answer myself. So we could very easily do that deeper dive and get that additional information in preparation for next week's meeting.
Yeah, I think that would be, especially if, you know, again, you know, grateful for the fact that you said we could look at this stuff on kind of a case by case or maybe group by group, you know, the parents who put it in the survey that they, you know, are definitely looking into the online platform just because it's convenient. We could maybe start to see, okay, we're going to have 50 students who fall in that category, and it might just be helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
Jamie also said he did not have any other questions. So last chance. We're good. All right. So we have no reports from the subcommittees. We have no ongoing business. We have no new business. But we have a possible motion for an executive session.
Recommended motion, I move that the school committee meet in executive session pursuant to MGLC 30A. I don't know what that symbol's called. 2 section, thank you. 2(1)A, purpose. 2, to conduct a strategy session in preparation with collective bargaining with all staff, and purpose. 7, consideration of release of executive session minutes of previous meetings to reconvene into open session. This motion requires a roll call vote. The chair will repeat the reason to meet in executive session.
We need a second.
So there was a motion. Is there a second? Thank you. So again, the school committee would be in executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, Purpose 2, to conduct a strategy session in preparation with collective bargaining of all staff. In Purpose 7, consideration of release of executive session minutes of previous meetings to reconvene into open session. Is there any discussion? Are we reconvening? Do we need to reconvene? Because that's how it was read.
I don't believe there's a need to reconvene.
Yeah, I don't think that's anything that has to come back out, much to the dismay of our crowd. So can somebody make a motion to amend to not reconvene?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
So can we now do a roll call vote on the motion to have an executive session and not come back to public meeting? Jamie?
Yes.
Susie?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Gianna?
Yes.
Bronwyn?
Yes.
And yes for me as well. Thank you all for coming. See you next week.